Thank you, Lord. All right, you guys ready for Seth Robertson? Here he comes. Come on, brother. Give him a great big shout as he comes.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to always be with you guys. You mind, Bishop, if I get them to pull me up a stand? That would be great. Yeah, that'd be great. Just something to lay this stuff on. I appreciate you guys letting me come down here and hang out with you. I just want to talk to you a little bit about growing a team, how to develop ministry, and also how to develop yourself. Right there is perfect. That's great. I'll shift it around and talk to it and everything else. So what I want to talk to you tonight about is why you need to build a team to lead anything. And in that, as we walk through this, you may think, well, I'm not a leader. Maybe this doesn't apply to me. I promise you the stuff we're going to talk about tonight applies in every avenue and aspect of life. It's a lot of business principles. These are a lot of just leadership principles. There are also a lot of principles we need to use when we lead ourselves. So as we walk through this road, it's going to be interactive. I'm going to ask for you to talk back to me a little bit. Ask questions. If you got something you want to say, speak up. We'll go back and forth. I know that their stuff is being recorded, so if you do throw your hand up, we'll make sure we get a mic to you so that we can get the questions on air too. So I'm going to pray this part in before we get started. You guys ready? Yep. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that in these moments of preparation, you speak to our hearts and our spirits. Lord, as this room is full of potential, Lord, as you have gifted us with leaders and opportunities and ministries in front of us, I pray that we don't take any of them for granted, and I pray that we don't miss any opportunity to reach a lost soul for you. Lord, may we not get so caught up in the process of ministry that we forget the people, which is the purpose to begin with. Lord, I pray that you give us wisdom as we prepare, as we grow. Speak into our hearts. In the name of Jesus Christ, my soon-coming King, I pray. Amen. Amen. Let's do this. All right, so I want to talk to you first about a traditional church established in the United States. A traditional church in the United States is a pastor, and everything revolves around him or her. Everything revolves around the pastor. It is a relational-based model. And the reason we have a relational-based model is because when ministry began in the United States, people didn't travel more than 15 to 20 miles, sometimes in their whole life. So everybody was about relationship, and it was people were close, and so you would have a small town that may have a Methodist church, a Presbyterian church, a full gospel church, and everybody went to one of the churches. Everybody in town went to one of them, and all of the churches held everybody in town, and most of them were running between 40 and 70 people. You know, the average church in America today is still 77 people. Even with all the mega churches included in and mixed in, that means there's a ton of them that are 25 to 35 people. You are looking at a pastor of a church of 35 people. I pastored a church of 35 for 2.5 years, and I could not get it to grow. People don't like me that much. That's all I could get was 35. No matter what I did, that was kind of the core. That was who it was. Until I started realizing that growing a church and actually being able to hold it together is a lot like growing a business. I'd been a businessman. I'd owned a heat and air conditioning business for 17 years, and I was able to grow it exponentially. And I realized that some of the principles would go from business world into the church world. Matter of fact, Jesus, his first recorded words were, "Did you not know I would be about my Father's business?" It was the intentionality of reaching people that mattered to Jesus. It wasn't haphazardly going by. It wasn't hoping somebody would walk in. It was strategically going to reach the lost. So Jesus put business principles into Scripture because the truth is business principles are biblical principles, successful ones. I was at 35. I met a man by the name of Josh Hanna. He opened my eyes to see some structure to challenge me to start growing. He asked me my heart. And I told him what all I wanted to do in ministry. I wanted to get outside the walls. I wanted to reach the lost. I am not a shepherding pastor. I am an evangelistic pastor. I am always looking to reach one more. It is my heart to find people far away from God and bring them in. And he talked to me about growing a crowd and building a structure. So as we started building that structure, we realized this model won't work if you want to get more than this right here. See, the traditional model, you would grow, and the only way you would get to that number is if you had a pastor and their spouse. And then if the church actually had enough money and you could add an associate pastor, then you could start going beyond that, and you could go up. If the associate pastor had a spouse, then you could go up to about 150. Then most churches, if hopefully by the time they got to 150, they had enough money, they'd get a part-time student director. Work with the teenagers. Well, that would add another 40 people, so you're around 190. Under this model, if everything worked out great, money flowed, the building debt wasn't too much, you could maybe get around 250 max for a relational church model. But everything had to work out perfectly. For most people, it doesn't. So the average church in America, 77 people. How many of you believe God called you to reach more than 77 people? I want to challenge you that everybody in the room, if you are not a pastor, not in ministry in any way, God is asking for more than 77 people for you to impact and influence. It is all of our jobs to reach the lost. The pastor's job is for the equipping of the saints for the doing of the ministry. It's just to equip. But as pastors, as leadership, we want to equip more than 77 people and get them active and in the game. So we got to change our structure. So we've got to go from a relational model, and we've got to move that and shift that into what we would call a mid-sized church. And it's a programmatical model. In a programmatical model, you actually start adding, you'll have a pastor and four very specific directors. You have a worship director. You will have a connections director, students, which are teenagers, and kids. Kids are up to 12 years old. Anything over 12, 13 to 18 go into students. Worship, connections, students, and kids. If you can shift to this model of ministry, all of a sudden you can grow exponentially. And as a pastor, as your church gets bigger, you actually pastor fewer people. So I started at 35, and my journey began. And the first thing I did at 35 was not hold an event to get more people in the door. It wasn't try to get everybody excited to come hear me preach. I'm not that good of a preacher. What was my move? I got a connections director. Got them in place and started working through this model of putting people in places. When I say got a connections director, don't think I paid anybody. My church didn't have any paid staff till we broke 500. Not a soul. People, you've got to find their calling and get them engaged with you in the ministry. Just like you're called into the ministry, they will be called. So why we need a team is for us to be able to grow past 77. We need a team so we can absolutely make impact. So if you will look in the yellow pamphlet you got on the first page, I want to make sure I walk through this so you can go back and revisit your notes. Every single one of us as a leader will hit a lid if we run individually. The lid is the cap on our ministry. It'll go no further. It doesn't matter how gifted you are. There's a limit to how many people you can maintain relationship with. Psychologists tell us it's 40 people that we can maintain close personal relationships with, so our lid we'll hit our lid very quickly. So the answer to fixing a plateaued or declining ministry is to evaluate present leadership and create a new level of leadership. Here's the problem with evaluating present leadership. We got to start with us as pastors. You know why my church stayed at 35? Because I was insecure. My insecurities. I wanted to be the one that showed up early and cut the lights on and cut on the sound system and went through, made sure the heat was on, made sure all the chairs were straight. I'd go to the bathroom and check the paper towels and the toilet paper. I'd go through the whole building and do everything. And I would complain the whole time. Man, I wish there was somebody else help me do this. The problem was I kept showing up and doing it. And if you were willing to show up and do it, they will let you do it. And so I, who have a calling on my life to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, spent my Sunday mornings changing toilet paper rolls. Is changing toilet paper roll beneath me? Nope. Is it where I should be spending my time 15 to 20 minutes before I get ready to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ? Nope. What I'm really doing is still in somebody else's role in the kingdom. Ephesians chapter 4 says there are many gifts, one body. All of us have something to bring to the body. But if we are not using our gifts to proclaim the body, use it in some way to further God's kingdom, we're not living up to the purpose God called and created us for. Every one of us has a role in building the kingdom. Everybody that walks through your doors has a part to play. Everybody in your community who hadn't come through the doors has a part to play. They have a calling and a purpose on their life that they are unaware of. But God created them for a reason and a purpose. He's trying to get them to that place. As a pastor, your job is not to do the ministry. Your job is to empower the people around you to do the ministry. If you are in the room and you are not a pastor, and you're not in a position of church leadership, your job is the doing of the ministry. Leadership is to organize and empower you to help you do the ministry. That's the whole purpose of church leadership in the hierarchy. As you grow and develop and walk with Christ, some of you may grow into a place of leadership. But if you continue to be a doer and a worker when you get into leadership, you will actually become the lid for your own ministry. Is there any shame in doing the ministry? No, it's the heart of who all of us are. But at some point, you have to get to a place where you're empowering others to do that work. If not, I'm stealing from you your blessings. How many pastors have spent weeks after months after years doing everything around the church, and we're actually stealing the blessings of our congregations? I'm guilty. Done it. And the whole time I used it as an excuse. Well, if I don't do it, who will? And if somebody's in the hospital, if I don't go pray for them, who will? Like I'm the only one that can get a prayer to heaven. How arrogant is that? But it was my own insecurities that I needed to be needed. I wanted somebody to want me in the room that kept me constantly going. In that, the enemy keeps us small and our influence low. Our insecurities is what keeps us low. As you get past your insecurities and start building a team of directors, you start pushing down relationships, you start pushing down responsibility, decision making. You've got to give them permission to make decisions without you. It's tough, but it's true. And if you have to have every decision run through the pastor's the lid. If every decision has to come through you, you're the lid. You're the stranglehold. I want to give you a principle. This one's not in your notes. If you want to write this on the back, this is worth the trip right here. It's called EBSI. E stands for employee. This is the employee mindset. How many in the room are an employee? All of us are employed by somebody. But the employee mindset has a task or a job. They start at a certain time in the morning. They get done at a certain time in the afternoon. When they're done, they don't think about the job or task again until tomorrow. They don't have a system or a process. They show up and do what they're told. I've been one. Some days I'm still one. When my wife gets home, I become an employee. I do what I'm told. Mindset shifts. An employee mindset is only about getting the task accomplished and making it through another day. They have no system. No thought process about it, no strategy, just do the task. When I was an employee doing heat and air conditioning, I was 17, 18, 19 years old. I started doing heat and air for my uncle. And I would show up every morning 30 minutes late. Thank goodness he was my uncle, and he couldn't fire me. 30 minutes late, I would go to the job. I'd sleep in the truck on the way there. I'd get out of the truck. I'd do whatever I was told to do. Now, I did it halfway decent. I tried to learn something, but that was it. When it was over, I was just looking to see what I could get into and make it to the next day when I showed up 30 minutes late again for work. I had absolutely no system, no process, just survival. Well, I did that for a while, and then I started working for another company that was a little larger, and then I started seeing how much money they were making and how little money I was making, and I decided I didn't want to be an employee anymore. I wanted to be self-employed. So I started my own heat and air conditioning business at 21 years old. 21 years old, I decided I was going to have my own heat and air conditioning business. I started with me in a truck. I hired a couple of guys. Here, I was the system. When I was the system, every single decision had to come through me. So I spent all day thinking for three people, me and my two employees. Anybody ever had to think for your employees? It's exhausting. But because I didn't have a system for them to know what to do and when to do it, everything came through me. I was the system. This customer's upset. I've got to handle it. This This thing didn't come in. I got to fix it. Oh, we need to buy some equipment. I've got to order it. We got to register the warranty on this new install. I was the system. I worked myself to death about 72 hours a week. I would work all day with the guys. Then I'd go home, order equipment, do all the paperwork, do everything for the next day. And I started calculating what I was making per hour, and I was making less per hour then than I was when I worked for somebody else. Truth. I was just putting in triple the hours so I had more money. I felt like I was somebody because I was self-employed. But the truth was I was just paying for me to have a job. And most days I was trying to work hard enough to earn enough money to pay my employees because they weren't earning enough money to pay their own paychecks. Oh, that's some harsh truth, isn't it? If you own a company, that's real. But I was the system. I worked myself silly, about lost my marriage because I was married to my company because it became my system. It took my priority. When I did this, I genuinely died. I did that for 7.5 years, working myself to death. Here's what happened. 7.5 years, almost death, about lost my family. Everything looked good on the outside, but I was dying inside because I was nothing but moving through the process. One day, I hired a woman to run my office. I hired this woman to run my office, and this woman came in and she started putting systems in place. In other words, instead of every morning Seth having to come in and get the guy started, she put a system. When you get here, first thing you do is clean your truck. Then you load today's job. Then you go through and make sure all the stock is on your truck. Then you get the call slip. Then you go to the job. When you get to the job, customer signs off before you begin. When you finish, they sign off. You leave a sticker with your name on it. Checklist. At the end of the day, you go through a checklist. Everything on the job. Did all this happen? What all's missing on my truck? Inventory the truck. So when you turn it in that afternoon, somebody in the shop can put all the inventory back on the dock so tomorrow morning you can put it back on your truck. She put in systems. Those systems allowed me to go fishing during the middle of the day. I'd show up in the morning, all the guys would already be gone. I'd stick my head in the office. By then I had grown. I became the fastest growing heat and air conditioning company in Virginia for 3 years in a row. Why? Was it because I was a great guy? No. Was it because I was working harder than everybody else? Nope. It's because I finally had systems. And most companies operate right here at best. And I finally had systems. I became a business owner. Until then, I would have swore I was a business owner right here, but I didn't own my business. My business owned me. Completely different deal. And you may be thinking, what in the world has this got to do with church? Give me a minute. When I got systems in place, the systems made the decisions. I no longer had to. And if those decisions were being made in the system, I now had time to think about the future. So instead of just making moment by moment decisions, day by day decisions, trying to survive, I could start planning with vision and moving strategically. That says strategically. If you can't read it, it's because I can't spell it and I just scribbled it. Don't judge me. I barely got out of high school. Strategic planning. Here's what I learned. There's a principle called a Pareto principle. And he's like a 1876 economist. I think he was from Italy. And Pareto said this, 20% of what you do produces 80% of the results. 20% produces 80%. You know that's true. 20% of my business produced 80% of my profit, which meant 80% of what I was doing produced almost no profit. It was just busy work. But every time you do a job, it's liability, it's expense, it's running up and down the road, it's wear and tear on vehicles. I've got man hours involved. I'm paying overtime to do work that's barely making any money. So I evaluated my company to see what was producing all of my profit. Once I applied that principle, now I didn't need near as many employees to produce more profit than what I already had. I took the fastest growing heat and air conditioning company from 17 guys in trucks and 4 women in the office down to 3 guys and 1 office person and made double the money because I got efficient at what was producing. The reason you're in business is not to do as much work as you can. The reason you're in business is to produce as much profit as you can as efficiently as possible. I also was able to give a whole lot better customer service because I wasn't dealing with a bunch of customers I wasn't making any money on, which were just aggravating me to death and keeping me from taking care of my good customers. I got better, they got better. They got better service, I made better money. You're thinking, man, this dude is selfish. He's teaching us to make money. Look, the Bible does not say anything wrong against making money. Whatever your hands find to do it with all your might as glory unto the Lord, and God honors that. Think about it. I had a group of pastors the other day, and one of them said, well, we've always been taught that pastors ought to be in poverty. It gives God glory. And I said, well, hold on. Solomon, who was put in a position of leadership, God asked him, what can I do for you? And he said, give me wisdom that I may lead. And because of that, God made him the wealthiest king on the face of the earth. So God isn't against wealth. God's against wicked. He's against greed. And I found a whole lot more greedy poor folks than I have greedy rich folks. They think money is the answer, and it's not. What is the answer is your mentality. See, this is changing the way you think. Money's not a problem. Loving money's a problem. Be productive, be efficient. So then I got to the place where, okay, now I've got less people, but I'm making more money. I went from a business owner to an investor. An investor invests in others' systems. So I would take some money and invest it in somebody else who was doing something great, and I would make money while I was asleep. Because I was making money not on my work or my effort, but I was making money on somebody else's system. I got a question. How many of you in the room can make a better cheeseburger than McDonald's? If your hand didn't go up, you in sad shape. If you can make a better cheeseburger than McDonald's, you got a better product. How come they've sold over 1 billion cheeseburgers this year and you hadn't? They got a system. McDonald's is not about the cheeseburger. Cheeseburger ain't that great. McDonald's, and when I say ain't that great, it's only because I'm on TV and I want to get sued. They sell the system that you can order and they can produce the food in moments and it comes out the door. It's convenient. They're not selling cheeseburgers. They're selling convenience, which is the system that gets it done. And they can do it with the entry-level workers, entry-level employees. Why? Because the employees don't have to make a decision. The fries go down. When they go beep, beep, they come up. When they're out of fries, you drop them down again. When they go beep, beep, you pull them back up. Same thing with a cheeseburger. You put it in the little thing, it beeps, you pull it out, you put this, and this on it, wrap it up, send it down the line. It's a system. Systems produce. Churches have no systems. Churches either operate on an employee mentality of a pastor, which means the board is telling the employee the pastor what to do, and he becomes the employee. So all he does is accomplish the task the board sees fit, and the board wasn't called to lead the church. The board was put in there as an accountability. That's it. And if you're a board member in here and I offend you, I apologize, but I don't see anywhere in Scripture where a pastor is supposed to subjugate the ministry to the board. The board's job is there to be a covering to make sure he's doing everything ethically and to hold some accountability and to be a support structure as you're doing the work of the ministry together. But it's not to say, hey, pastor, we don't have the money for that. Nope, you ain't got the faith for that. I've never, ever seen God run out of money on his ministry. Ever. It doesn't happen. So we got to make sure we're not being the employee mindset as we're leading. But then we go, this is where 99% of pastors in America stay, is in self-employed. They are the system. Every single thing has to run through them. They've got to know what color paint's going on. They got to pick out the scent for the air fresheners in the bathroom. They got to know every little thing. And it's not necessarily that the pastor is extra controlling, although sometimes it can be. Other times it's because they have not released the decision-making to other people, and so they're terrified to make a decision without talking to the pastor. When you hold back people's ability to make decisions, you stifle their growth. So as pastors, we create rooms full of baby Christians that are still requiring milk when they ought to be eating meat. And it's because we won't let them make decisions on their own and give them some freedom. Look, and in that, are they going to make mistakes? Yes. My kids, I got 3 of them. Love them to death. Did they make mistakes? A ton of them. That's how you grow up. You make mistakes, you learn. Oop, I ain't going to do that again. My daughter called me yesterday. She had made a mistake. She is 19. She lives in Nashville. She moved out there to take a job. She calls me. Tears are running. Daddy? Yes, ma'am. There's blue lights behind me. Were you speeding? Yep. Well, that's why them blue lights are there. You caused it. Cause and effect. She said, what am I going to do? I said, I guess you're going to get a ticket. And my insurance is going up because you're 19. So now we're going to have some conversation, which is the exact way it works with a pastor when somebody in your congregation makes a mistake. Are they somewhat accountable? Yes, but will it come back and you'll still have to deal with it? Absolutely. But if you don't let them feel the pressure of that mistake, they'll never learn. Like, I'm not paying that bill for my 19-year-old daughter. My 19-year-old daughter's paying that bill. And it's not because I wouldn't want to or I couldn't. It's because she needs to learn from that mistake by feeling the pressure of the moment. Failure grows you more than success ever will. Let the people under your ministry feel the pressure of their decisions. Oftentimes, we run in and save them and circumvent what God's actually trying to do in their life. God is growing them, but we run in to play the hero. So the next thing we're going to say is hero's mentality. Me too, brother. I try to save everybody. Everybody I know, I try to keep them from hurt and pain, and I have this protector's mentality. But you know who I crush? My family, as I'm trying to run out and protect everybody else. If I'm giving away time to somebody else, it came from somewhere. We all got 24 hours in a day. And if they didn't take enough time to keep themselves out of that situation, why am I taking my time to go bail them out of it? Am I saying don't love them? No, absolutely love them. But if somebody makes the same mistake twice, it's not a mistake, it's a decision. And they need to feel the pain of that decision so that they can change their ways. God dealt with me on this very, I don't know how God talks to you. God talks to me in the way I talk to him. So I talk to God like I'm talking to one of you, and we're just sitting there chatting, and me and God talk, and sometimes he'll use my language to come back at me. So he's like, all right, knucklehead, keep interfering, and they're going to have to keep running the same rat wheel over and over again because you keep jumping in and keeping them from learning the lesson I'm trying to get them to learn. And because you think you need to help them and save them, they got to keep going through the same mess over and over again. He said, now it's not their problem, it's your problem because you keep them in it. Yeah, y'all enjoyed that more than I did. I'm like, yes, Lord. I'm sorry, Daddy. My bad. What I need to do? He said, butt out. So the next time they called and said, Pastor Seth, you don't understand. I hear you. I understand. You acted yourself into it. You got to act yourself back out of it. And that starts by making different decisions. So the decision-making process. Now, the reason we're walking through all of this is because most pastors get stuck as the system. And because we want to circumvent and keep other people from feeling pain because it's our pastor's heart, we keep coming back and being the system. Everybody comes to us for the answers. Pastor, I can't make my car payment. Pastor, I can't pay my bills. Pastor, I don't have money to get my kids shoes for school. Yeah, but you got an iPhone 10 you just called me on. You bought what you wanted and you begged what you needed. That's a problem. And that's a mentality issue, and it all is driven from insecurities because you don't feel like you're enough, so you try to buy things to make you look like you're better than you are so other people will see you different than you really are. You're trying to circumvent reality. And where does insecurity come from? That's the devil. The devil felt insecure. That's why he sinned. Satan was leading. He's an angelic being called Lucifer, is the most beautiful of all the angels, leading worship in heaven. But because he wanted to be God, which meant he didn't feel like he was enough as he was, that's an insecurity. He desired the worship that came to the Father, and he failed. He got kicked out of heaven along with a third of the angels. When he hits Eve in the Garden of Eden, he hits her with the same thing. He said, God doesn't want you to eat this because you'll become like him, which means like you are is not enough. That's insecurity. Anytime you feel like what you are is not enough, you try to compensate. And by compensating, as a pastor, for me, I tried to be the hero. It was my compensation for my own insecurities. In that, I kept people from growing. I became the system, and I stifled the growth of my church. We couldn't get above 35. We would grow to 50 and slide back to 35. Why? Because that's all the people I could save on a day-in, day-out basis. So we started getting systems. The systems we got, connections, worship, students, kids. And the systems themselves are useless without somebody to run them. Look, if you run a business, you can break your business up the exact same way. You departmentalize. This is actually a Roman military concept. All militaries throughout the world run on this concept. Departmentalize, send down vision, get problem solving coming back up, and you function unified as a team. But for you to have a team that operates and functions collectively, you've got to have a unified vision, and it's got to be clear. Make it plain and write it down that the people can run with it. If you don't have clear vision, what you'll have is division. So the original model we talked about was a pastor, spouse, then you got an associate pastor. Have you ever watched a church split right there as the associate pastor got to a certain point and he had more of the relationships than the pastor and then the church divide? It's actually, the system sets up for that. It's not intentional, but it's set up for it because one person can't maintain relationships with all the people, so it divides. But it starts dividing when the vision gets separate. The way you keep unified vision is you keep everybody pulling towards the same task. You do that by setting measurable goals. In a church, if you do not keep metrics and measure things that matter, you cannot set goals and you cannot keep a unified vision. When I say metrics, how many of y'all count the people? You'd be amazed how many churches don't. I'm like, you don't count them? Well, David got in trouble for numbering the troops. It's true. David did get in trouble for numbering the troops, but David got in trouble for numbering the troops because he thought the troops were his. But if you number the people, understand you're not numbering the people because they're a number to you. You're numbering them to keep a calculation of how many of hells we have taken back. Amen. See, I'm going to preach a little bit just for a second. All right, so when Jesus Christ said, I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, any of y'all ever been attacked by a gate? I've never seen anybody got attacked by a gate. Then why does he say the gates of hell shall not prevail against it? The gates of hell are a defensive mechanism. They're not to keep people in, they're to keep us out. And so when he says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, it means that the body of Christ, the church of Jesus Christ, should be an offensive organism that is continually going out and raiding the gates of hell and bringing people into salvation. We were not created to be a defensive being. The church of Jesus Christ is militaristic. It's the reason he gave us the whole armor of God and he gave us a sword as a weapon. He didn't give us gates. He gave us swords, which means we are the invading force. The devil already has the earth. It's his. The fullness of the earth was given to him when Adam and Eve sinned. Jesus Christ went back and took back the title deed, so he has ownership, but the devil still goes to and fro about the earth, seeking whom he may devour. So the church of Jesus Christ is supposed to be an offensive organism that goes and attacks the gates of hell. Drug and alcohol rehab, reaching out to single mothers, people in places of desperation, people in places of hurt and brokenness. We should be going out and playing offense. And that's why he said the gates of hell won't prevail against us, because we're constantly attacking the gates and they can't stand. The problem is the church has quit attacking the gates and we've just locked ourselves with inside walls and hoping the devil don't come in. But he does, because we walk in the building. He walks in with every one of us. And so we bring the enemy in, but we're always thinking, well, I'm just glad he didn't come knocking at my door today. Thank you, Lord. That's the pastor down the street got caught in the middle of a mess, not me this week. We hate to say that, but we think it all the time. Oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Did you hear about the mess they done got in? They done had an affair and they did it. We like talking about it because we're thankful it ain't us. The church was not meant to play defense. We also weren't meant to leave people hanging out. So when somebody gets in a spot where they fail, we ought to be the ones rallying around them and setting up a protective perimeter and pulling them back in. Look, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. I don't know why we get to condemning each other. Sorry, that's a sideline. But we have to be systematic in the way we approach reaching the lost. Systematic, intentional approach in reaching the lost. As we unify our vision and we have measurable goals, we can keep ourselves on track because we're reaching what we set up as our goal. So if you keep metrics, so you're going to keep attendance. What else do you think would be important to measure as a church? Everybody acting all holy. Everybody's all holy. Y'all know what we count? The money. Every single church in here counts the offering. We like try to get all holy. Oh, we don't even look. We just dump it off the back. Why do we count the money? Is it because we're scared God's running out? Nope. The fullness of the earth is his. The funniest thing to me is people be like, I can't give God my money. What's your money made out of? Paper. And how'd that come from? Trees. And where'd that come from? The fullness of the earth is his. And look, our money used to be based on the gold standard. Well, where did gold come from? God put it in the earth, and he made it valuable. He made it shiny and made it appeal to the lust of the eye so that we would value it. But God put it there. So God ain't broke, and he don't need your money to keep his ministries going. You need to give your money to keep the ministries going so you can be a part and so your heart's right. That's right. Giving is not about getting something from you. It's giving something to you. It is absolutely about giving you the blessings of God. Micah 3:10, bring the full tithe into the storehouse that I may open the windows of heaven and pour out upon you a blessing your barns cannot contain. But we measure giving for this reason. Yes, we've got a budget. Yes, we've got things we've got to cover. God will take care of that. We measure giving. I measure giving because it shows the maturity of the people in my congregation. If my congregation is maturing and growing in Christ, the giving goes up because the closer you are to God and the more you realize how God's financial system works, the more freely you give. Because as you give, he who sows abundantly reaps abundantly. And he who sows sparingly reaps sparingly. First question I ask anybody that comes up to me and says, Pastor, I need help paying my rent. You paying your tithes? And they'll look at me. What do you mean? If you're not doing what God called you to do to unlock his blessings, why are you coming to me? I can give you all the money in the world. It ain't going to fix your problem because you're not operating in obedience to his word. And I don't have enough money to give you past being obedient to God. And what am I going to look like looking at a congregation full of tithing believers and say, hey, I took y'all's tithing money that you gave out of your commitment and gave it to this person over here that don't believe God's real or thinks he's a liar, and I gave it to them because I think that's a good investment of your money. I ain't doing it. I'm not taking God's money that's going to be used for his ministry and giving it to somebody else who is not faithfully walking in his word. Now, I will walk with them through a process of learning and getting them to that place, and it's not harsh or judgmental. I need them to trust God and not me circumvent it by giving them money, and it keeps them operating out of God's obedience. I taught them to not work in obedience to God by giving them money when they weren't doing what they were supposed to do to unlock the blessings. What if God was trying to teach them that lesson and I cut it off? So I measure giving because it gives me maturity. It shows me the maturing of my congregation. What else would I measure? Attendance. Absolutely measure attendance. Measure giving. Anybody got anything else? Expenses. You better measure expenses. Now here's how I look at that. We operate on a budget. And I've got to give an account as a pastor for every dollar we spend. We need a back parking lot. Our back parking lot is a mud hole. To pave our back parking lot is $200,000. Well, I'm not putting $200,000 of God's resources on the ground. I can't do it. I can't stomach it. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that where we are as a church, I can't justify it. So we put in $7,000 worth of gravel, and we're going to live with it. We in the country, we can survive. We'll walk across rocks. We got people to come to church and carry their high heels in. Change at the door. Do what you got to do. We ain't paving it. I got to give an account. All right. What else? Look, most churches want to say measure salvations. You know why I don't measure salvations? It's subjective. You're right. I don't know your heart or your soul. And so it's a subjective number. So you could say you got saved every week on Wednesday and my numbers would look good, but the kingdom ain't grown. So I don't measure salvations. Baptisms, I keep an account, but it's not a measurable for me. Like I don't keep that as far as a goal I set, but we keep that just so we know how many people have been baptized throughout the year, but it's not what I use to set goals with. The other thing I set goals with is leaders. I want to know how many leaders I'm developing. Strategic development of leadership. You can't just hope leaders are going to get developed. Tonight, Bishop Ricky has said, I want to invest intentionally in leaders around me, not just in my church and other churches. I want to help everybody grow because it's one body, one kingdom. It's not about who gathers in what building. It's about the fact, do you know who the king is? Do you have a personal relationship? We want to develop leaders. Strategically develop leaders. You don't just develop leaders, just hope they develop, they grow. You got to intentionally pour into their lives. The other thing I want to measure is volunteers. The more people I have involved and engaged, it means I'm bringing people in and they're getting connected and they're buying into the idea that the ministry is done by the saints. So I want to know my volunteers and my leaders. My budget, absolutely, I'm going to look at. I'm not going to publish it. I'm not going to post it on the door because if you let people look at it, all of a sudden they feel like they get an opinion. I'm going to have to stand before God and give an account, I promise you, and I've got a board of directors to hold me accountable. I'm not going to publicly give that to the whole congregation. Here's why. There's different maturity levels in my congregation. And some people will see that budget and think, we're not spending near enough money on this, this, and this. Another person will see it and say, man, we're spending way too much money on this, and this, and they're the exact same things. Because maturity level sees how you manage money. So I want to make sure I've got a board or somebody to hold me accountable to that, but I won't publish it to the congregation. That's just me personally. Caused me more issues than it fixed. As we measure these things, we can tell if our church is healthy and growing. It's also a way to tell if we got the right leadership in place. If I'm measuring these measurables in different areas and I've got one area not growing, one area not moving, I know it's a leadership issue. So I want to talk to us about those 4 very distinct directors. So the first one is connections. We're going to walk right down this sheet. This is my scoreboard. I want everybody who's engaged to know what the scoreboard is. Anybody ever played sports? You ever played sports with little kids? Like my 10-year-old plays soccer, and for the past couple years, they've been like, don't y'all keep score. We don't want, this is a developmental league, don't keep score. Man, you lost your mind. You going to tell a 10-year-old kid who just scored a goal in soccer not to keep score? Man, he done run down the field, looked like Lupe done slid and took his shirt off, celebrating. Not keeping score is the best way to suck the life out of your church. Because if somebody doesn't have a goal and an objective, then they get going through the routine and they don't even know why they're doing it. Keep score. If you own a business, keep up with your profitable quarters. Set goals, set objectives. Figure out how to do that. Like if you're running a business and I wanted to set a goal and say I wanted to have a $30,000 profitability in one quarter, I can do that 2 ways. Increase income, cut down the overhead and expenses. So both sides of that will determine my profitability. In a church setting, to increase your income, get more givers, and decrease where you're spending on overhead and make sure you're not wasting money. I cannot stand wasting money. There's kingdom resources. Jesus Christ fed 5,000 men, not including women and children. So it was probably about 20-some thousand people on the hill. And when he got done with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, he fed all them people. He still took up the leftovers. Why does a God who can exponentially expand and multiply 5 loaves and 2 fishes to feed 20,000 people need the leftovers? To teach us not to waste his resources. Just because he has an abundance doesn't mean we should waste anything. Same thing with people. I don't care if you got 100 or 7,000, the next one through the door matters. Because it's a child of the king that he laid his life down for. Treat all of them the same. Love every single person the same. So we want to keep goals to keep us accountable. We don't want to waste anything. And we want to pass these goals down. So for my connections director, and last time we were together, we talked about what a connections director does. They're in charge of your parking lot, your lobby, your worship center, and your follow-up team. And they connect new people to your congregation. Most churches don't have a connections team. It's the pastor and his wife's job to get everybody's name and call them back and take them out to lunch and hope they like them and they stay at the church. Intentionally put people fishing in your parking lot, in your lobby, give them roles. I hold them accountable by having measurables. So my connections team, I hold them accountable by the number of guests we have. We collect guest cards from every single guest. We get information. My connections team, I hold them accountable for how many guests we have. You think, well, how do they control guests? They're just standing in there greeting people. The more friendly you are greeting people, the more people who will come. Because if you're friendly and love on somebody that comes through the door, they'll bring somebody with them. Man, I ain't never been loved like this. I've never had somebody make me feel this welcome and this warm. They'll bring somebody with them. Any of you guys ever ate at a good restaurant? And we're like, man, that place was great. You tell everybody you know. Man, you got to try that new place. It was really good. It was different. It was clean. It was nice. People do the same thing with a church. So my connections director is responsible for guests. Then I want them to have 30% of my guests connected. I want 30% minimum of all my guests connected to my church. What I mean by that is I want them either in a group, a small group, or volunteering. Not just attending. I want them in a group or volunteering. 30%. Once they're connected, they'll build relationships. They're not leaving. That's how you have sustained growth. I'm going to ask this question I did last time I was here. How many of you got saved the first time you heard the gospel of Jesus Christ? One out of the whole room. I've asked that question all over the country. I've had about 10. If that's true, then we need to connect them to us so they stay coming and attending long enough that they fall in love with who Jesus is in us and we get to make the introduction. It's why getting them to come continually is so important. First the physical, then the spiritual. The next thing I want to hold my connections director accountable for is leaders. How many leaders they added? And a leader is not just somebody you say, hey, you're in charge. My leaders oversee 7 to 10 people. They have to attend meetings. Depending on which level of leader they are, how often those meetings are, they have to learn leadership principles and they have to be able to teach them and pass them down. But for every leader you add to your team, over a year, you'll add 10 new people. 10 people. You want to grow your church? Develop leaders. Because if they become a leader in church, they'll use those same skill set to lead people to the church. Amen. Works. They'll bring in 10. Then I measure volunteers. For every volunteer you get to sign up for a team, they'll bring 4 people to your church in a year. So if you add 10 new volunteers, your church is going to grow by 40 people that year. If you add 2 new leaders, that's 20 people they bring. So that's 60 people by adding 2 leaders and those volunteers. It's called growth from within. What you really do is you start developing the people God has given you, and as you develop them, they'll pull more people in with them. You'll find the same thing in the business world. If you have employees, if you will spend time training your employees, teaching them, getting them certifications, things that bring value to them, they'll bring in other high-quality employees from other places with them because they want to develop their skill set, and they'll actually make you a better company. They'll recruit for you. It's investing in people. They're your best assets. If you want to invest in people and do leadership training and get more volunteers on your teams, you'll start growing exponentially. It's a multiplying factor. You don't grow a church by getting a big crowd to come in and they go back out and you hope they like you. You'll wear yourself out holding big events. Churches have done it for generations. My father was a pastor for 30 years. They had this big event. It would have 10,000 people come to this big event they had. 10,000 people. You know how big his church was? 225. It was that before the event, and it was that after the event every single year. Because getting people to come to an event on your property that happens at a different service time and you don't connect them and you don't get them apart doesn't change a thing. They'll come in, they'll go out. They came up for the event. That's all they signed up for. You got to have a different strategy. So those are the things I want my connections director accountable for. Well, if my connections director is building and developing leaders, and every time they develop a leader, they add 10 people over the year to the church, and those leaders are pulling in volunteers, and they add 4, then my connections director is affecting my attendance. So I can now look at my connections director's team and say, hey, you need to add 10 new leaders. Well, that's going to account for 100 people over a year. And you got to add, you need at least 40 new volunteers. That's going to be 80, 160 more. So that's 260 people in growth that I can now ascribe to my connections director. Now, those are big numbers.
All right. So if we're going to grow, we got to talk big talk, right? And we got to be serious about maturity and about developing and growing. So this is good. I'm very happy to be able to bring people in like this, to fly them in, to train us and teach us so we can be the best that we can possibly be. How many of you agree with that? All right. Praise the Lord. Fantastic.
And I got my own interest involved. I'm looking at producing fruit in your field so that I get it when I get to heaven. I want God to look at me and say, well done. And there'll be people behind me I have never met, but because I was willing to sow into somebody else's life, you produce fruit that you wouldn't have without the system. And what that makes me is an investor. The EBSI, that makes me an investor. I'm investing in your systems. So I want to make sure your system is as effective as possible because it's producing fruit for you and for me. The question is how do you pick leaders? I'm going to give you the strategic way. Jesus Christ did not go out and say, hey, anybody want to follow me out of this crowd? Y'all come on, come with me. He handpicked his leaders. He picked his disciples. Also, you notice the first thing he did in ministry was build a team? He didn't go first thing and feed the 5,000. Why? Because he didn't have any way to take care of all those people. He wouldn't have had anybody to pass out the fish and the loaves. He built a team first. In ministry, build a team first. Jesus is not the first one that implemented this concept. Moses was. In the wilderness, when his father-in-law Jethro came to him and said, this isn't good, you're going to burn out and die, get people and set them over top of 50s and hundreds and thousands. It's the exact same concept. So we need to find good leaders. Jesus picked out good leaders, and he did not find them in the synagogue. He didn't go get the preachers. He went out and found fishermen and tax collectors and people you would never think of. It's called intentional fishing. So you'll have to forgive me. I grew up in the country, and so everything relates back to something outdoors. So I'm going to call this 3 kinds of fishing. There's 3 kinds of fishing. There's hobby fishermen, there's trophy fishermen, and there's commercial fishermen. And they're very distinct in difference. Most churches are hobby fishermen. Most churches go through the motions every week. They have a service. They do the exact same thing every week in and week out, and they just hope they catch something. That's like me when I'm a hobby fisherman. I put a worm on the hook, a bobber on it, cast it out, and I take a nap, hope for the best. When it's over, if I didn't catch nothing, it's just another day gone. A day by the pond is better than a day at work. And we treat church that way. Hope something gets on our hook. Yeah, what we put out there, fish like to eat. The fish need to eat. But they ain't necessarily want what we had because there may have been 50,000 other worms in the pond that were available. And so we find ourselves, if we're hobby fishermen, competing with other churches for church folks. But there's only 19% of America are church folks. That's it. 81% of all America does not attend church. We got to quit worrying about the 19% and go after the 81. That's the growth potential. All right, so if we're not a hobby fisherman, fishing for leaders is trophy fishing. Now, trophy fishing is a little different. If I'm going out looking for a big bass to hang on my wall, I'm going specifically to some spots where I know they hang out. Well, if I'm looking for a leader, let's go where leaders hang out. If I'm looking to I've got 4 leadership positions I need to fill at my church. I got kids director. Let's talk about how I would fish for a kids director. So these are my ponds. I got 3 ponds. Where would I go fishing for a kids director? Park, school, okay. Now we're talking, these are places where kids would be. That's great. Now let's think about people who lead kids. So you could talk about even coaches. Somebody that coaches Little League, coaches. Okay, so they're a coach. But if I'm going to get them to be a director, I really need them to lead adults and kids. So they need to think like a kid, but they need to be able to lead adults because they're going to lead all the classroom teachers. They're going to schedule. Man, a school principal would be phenomenal because they do both. And most of the time they have a teaching background, so they relate to the kids, but they also got some administrative skills. Let's go principal. Let's go teacher. A teacher who is in the process of doing some administrative side, maybe they also are going through school for to become a principal or want to be in administration. Phenomenal at it. Who else may be good as a kids director? Parents, yes. You find a stay-at-home mom that's got more than 3 kids, she can multitask, she can deal with kids, she can handle stress, and she got more patience than anybody I've ever known. So stay-at-home mom, I like it. Where else could we go fishing? Bus driver. Ooh. No, they just crazy. You would have to be crazy to drive a bus with 75 kids screaming in your ear all day. Sign up for that. But, hey, they got patience. All right, let's think about that. All right, so you got bus driver, you've got anybody who's really engaged with kids on any level, but also has some administrative skills. They have to do some oversight. They have to deal with people. Natural leadership. If they're already in a leadership position outside the church, it's a whole lot easier to get them in leadership inside the church. They already understand the concepts. They know how to deal with people. Anybody that deals with people is great on a director level. So if you can find a salesman, a salesperson, sometimes they're great. If they're good at dealing with people, then if they're good with dealing with people and love kids, if I can find a salesperson that also coaches a team of some sort, that's a win. So you're looking for a skill set because you're intentionally fishing for a kids director. It's not who's available. Now, you may have one of those in your church, somebody who fits that bill. You may not. And you're like, well, Seth, you don't even know if they know Jesus. They may not yet, but I'm going to introduce them. Yes, ma'am. Retired. If you can find a retired school teacher, retired principal, absolutely, that's phenomenal, especially if you don't have a budget. But I will tell you this, I hired all 4 of those positions and didn't pay none of them a dime for 4 years. But it's because it was their calling and they bought into the vision of where we were going. But I love that. If somebody who's retired and has that passion for kids and administration, I'll tell you where I found my first kids director. He worked at the Baptist church down the street. It was a big Baptist church. He was their head of administration. He did all their books. Well, large Baptist churches a lot of times don't want somebody that does their books going to their church because they don't want them to personally know all the givers. So they hire somebody from outside. Well, he went there and he worked there for them. Well, it only took him a day and a half to do everything they wanted him to do. And I said, well, hey, you can be our kids director and ask them if they care if you do some of that work there. They're like, no, we don't care as long as you got our stuff handled. We just need you in the office to answer the phone too. Feel free. So the Baptist church in town, Moffat Baptist, paid my kids director for the first 2.5 years of my ministry. That's winning. God will take the wealth of the wicked and give it to the... I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. I'm just kidding. They're great people. You got to get a dig in every now and then. But the truth is we were sharing a resource. They had money and they needed him to do a position. He was doing that. I didn't have any money, but I had a calling for him, and he did that. He just transitioned out of that position. He's now my executive director. But he did that for me for the first... He took us from when he joined, we were 35. When he took over as kids director, took us all the way to right at 900, 875. So he oversaw the growth of my kids ministry from 4 kids to 275 kids on Sunday, and all the teachers and staff that goes along with that. But he had that skill set in him. When we were a church of 35, he was sitting in the pews with that potential. But I had to unlock his potential. You'll get the same thing in all of these positions. So we've got those down. So the first box on your sheet is called prospects. Come up with as many names as you can possibly get from these different ponds and put them right here. I'm going to give you another pond we didn't talk about. Sometimes large churches in your area, they may not want you to take their kids director, but they may have a number 2 or number 3 person under their kids director who's really good, that they would say, you know what, they're looking for an opportunity and we don't have one for them to continue growing. If they're willing to come, you can absolutely talk to them. Now, I would talk to the pastor first. I would go through the process. But you would be amazed how many large churches would be willing to share staff with you and help you out. Worship directors. I've probably got 4 potential worship directors in my congregation right now. Well, I don't have an opportunity for all of them to grow. So I'm looking for churches around us. They may not could handle a worship team like the size of ours, but they'd be great at one of a church of 150, 200, and they could grow it with them to a church of 700 to 800 people. So I would love for them to get that opportunity. When you figure out as a pastor, it's not about growing your church, it's growing your people, and you're okay if that's growing them in somebody else's field, that's okay. It doesn't matter. You just want them to grow. And so you get this heart about sharing them and passing them into a place of ministry. So you write all these names in your prospect box. Once you get them down as your prospects, then you have a conversation. You call every one of them and tell them the why. It's not what you need them to do, it's why you need them to do it. If you start off with the what, you'll lose all of them right there. Start off with the why. I need you to do this because there are children that do not know that Jesus Christ loves them, died for them, that they are the most favorite creation of God Almighty is them. They need to know the truth of who they are and why they were created. I start off with the why. After I talk to all of them and give them the why, anybody who goes to the next box that says, yep, I'm interested. That's my interested box. I've talked to them, and I may have 4 or 5 that say, you know what, I'm interested in that. I may be interested in being your kids director. Let's talk about it. I've given them the why. They know the passion behind it and the calling. Now I give them the what. And when I give them the what, I give them the ugly, dirty truth. Kids are going to puke on you. They're going to cry on you. It's going to be long, hard days. Volunteers ain't going to show up like they say they're going to. It's going to be some days you're going to regret making this decision. I'm going to tell them the worst case scenarios. The reason is I don't want them to ever think I lied to them or didn't tell them the truth to get them in that spot. And that stuff is going to happen. So when it does, I'll be like, I told you. If they are still willing, even though they hear the horrible what of what it may take, they become committed. And that's the people I want, because if they don't have that kind of grit, they ain't going to survive. Leaders are all about tenacity. Committed. I give them the what, then they move into this box. That still doesn't mean they got the position. Now I pray and train. And I do everything on a trial basis. I learned this one the hard way. Before I ever appoint somebody to a leadership position, I say, hey, look, for 30, 60 days, let's try this out. We'll set a date. Let's try this, make sure it works for you. So if you decide you want out of it then, there's no hard feelings. And if I decide, man, this isn't really working out, we can slide you into another position. But it's on a trial basis. Then we'll both sit down and we'll talk it through. If you still agree you want it, we'll go from there. So I may have 3 people who committed to me that they want to be in this position, but only one of them is going to get it. And I want to make sure I have enough in the prospect box that when we get there, I've got more than one, because I don't like not having options. If you're the only one left standing, I did not appoint you. You just was the leftovers. So I want to make sure I've got multiple people there. Now, I will train all 3 of those, and I'll tell them there's multiple people working for this position. Most of the time, they'll know each other by this point. What I know is one of them will be my director. The other 2 may be my coordinators right underneath them. So I may have a kids director, and one may be over the babies and the other one over the elementary kids. And so I'll need all that leadership, but I will go through and see which one stands above. Then I'll appoint. I appoint leaders. Now, you asked me what are the characteristics I look for in people. Here are my characteristics for a leader. Number 1, character. I need you to be honest with me. Even if it's horrible, just tell me the truth. Pastor Seth, I stole $400. Well, at least you told me the truth. We can work through anything if you can own it. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up that gets you. I want character. The other thing I want is grit. I need somebody who's got enough grit. Ministry is tough. It is brutal. It'll weigh on you, and the enemy will attack you like nobody's business. It's proof that you're doing what God called you to do. If the enemy ain't messing with you, you ain't making no difference. So if you've got an easy ride, it's because you ain't doing nothing. So I need somebody that's got some grit and some tenacity. Then I want loyalty. Loyalty to me is a huge deal. I am not very relational with people. I love people. I love them deeply, but I don't talk to a lot of folks. I don't have a big circle of friends that I like to just go hang out with. I kind of do my thing, and then I'm home with the family. I'm good. I'm not relational, and as a pastor, that doesn't fit the mold. Most pastors are very relational. I'm not. I'm very task-driven, if you can't tell. This is how it is. And so I have to balance that. But because of that, I'm extremely loyal. So people who are on my staff, man, I got your back. If you need a tire for your car, or you need a set of tires, or you can't buy formula, or whatever your issue is, you're on my team, I got your back. But I want the same. I want loyalty. It's a big deal to me. So we talk about it. Those are the characteristics I look for. If I've got somebody in my church and I think, man, they may be a leader, I'm not sure. They may just be a real hard worker, because too often in church world, if somebody's a real hard worker, we'll promote them to leadership and we get them out of their gifting, and they struggle and the area struggles because they just work themselves to death. Anytime somebody tells me they're burning out or they're burnt out, I've got to know, do I have a worker in a leadership position? Burnout is a sign that they're trying to work instead of build a team to get it done. And it doesn't mean you do away with them. You train them to teach them how to build a team, and a lot of people can work through it. But by nature, working has always been promoted in the church world. So I will give them a task to find out if they're a worker or a leader by nature. The other day, I'm at church, and 5 teenagers, guys, are leaned up against the wall over here, and there's a bunch of chairs. And I walk over, and I'm like, hey, fellas, do y'all mind stacking all those chairs up for me? And 4 of them run over and start stacking chairs. The 5th one goes over, and he's like, hey, guys, hold on. He said, let's divide this up in areas, and I'm going to go get a couple other guys that are out front shooting basketball. We'll divide it up in areas, and we'll see who can stack the most chairs the quickest, and we'll time it and see who wins. All right. So he goes out and gets the others. They come in. I notice he's over there keeping time. He don't stack a single chair. You know what that is? We used to fuss and be like, that's lazy. No, that's leadership. He got the task accomplished, and he cut down the workload on everybody in the room because he got more people involved, and he organized them. Then he figured out how to motivate them by making it competitive. He organized, he motivated, got more people involved. That's leadership. And this was one proud daddy because that was my 17-year-old. And I figured out why his room never gets clean. He ain't got a team because he ain't doing it by himself. But he moved the room. He got it all handled. I give him a task. If somebody recruits a team to do a task, they got natural leadership instincts. It's phenomenal. Give them a task. The other thing you can do with somebody to figure out if they have some natural leadership instinct is not only give them a task and see if they do it themselves or not, but give them a problem and see what they come back with. A great leader will not just give you the answer to the problem. They'll go and consult some people and come back to you. I used to make this mistake all the time. I would instantly, you ask me, you give me a problem, I'd tell you my solution. Well, it may be a solution, but it's probably not the best solution. So we had a problem when we started growing really quickly. Our parking lot wouldn't hold everybody. So Tasha, my connections director, comes to me and says, the parking lot won't hold everybody. What do we need to do? I said, we need to do this, this, and this. And she goes and tells the team, do this, this, and this. Well, they go and do all of that, and they've got bigger problems than they had the week before. Why? Because I ain't never been out in the parking lot parking cars. I don't have a clue what it looks like. I know what the parking lot looks like empty, but I don't know what it looks like when it's filling up. I said, Tasha, I don't have a clue. Obviously, I made a big mess. Figure it out. Tasha doesn't come up with her own solution. She goes to the guys who are working in the parking lot and says, hey, guys, here's the problem. And they're like, yeah, we know. What do y'all think? Oh, here's how we'd fix it. Guess what? Fixed it. Not only did it fix it then, we went from 500 to almost 900, and we still don't have any problems because they fixed it. Leadership has the wisdom to know what you do not know. The most dangerous leader in the room is the one who does not know what he does not know, and he tries to make solutions out of everything. I can tell when a 2-second conversation with you if you're naturally a leader. I'll mention something to you. If you give me the negative first before the positive, that's a problem. It doesn't mean you can't learn through it, but it means you don't have a natural inkling as a leader. It means you naturally see the problems, not the solutions. Natural leaders always see potential and opportunity. Those who lean the other way, who tend to be natural workers, tend to see the problems. It doesn't mean you won't grow through it. 10% of the population is natural-born leaders. Everybody else is learned leaders. And sometimes the learned leaders are a whole lot better than the natural-born leaders. I'll give you an example. Anybody ever had a worship director and they were extremely talented, but you couldn't tell them nothing? Every pastor in the room's like, my worship leader ain't here. Yes. I've been in the church world my whole life. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, and my father were all pastors. It's all I've known. Every time I've ever heard them talk about issues with the music department, they're like, well, they're real creative, so they're emotional, and so it's a struggle. No, they're real talented, so they were allowed to be emotional, and they didn't have to grow. Great pastors can be the same way. If somebody's a gifted communicator, sometimes their talent will get them past having to grow and mature, and so they'll want things a certain way and want to control everything even though they're really gifted. Because in the gifting, they don't have to develop. It would be like a basketball player who is naturally gifted in high school. They crush everybody. They go to college and get their hind end handed to them because they don't grow and develop because they've always relied on their natural talent. Where if you take a guy who wasn't great, there's a guy at the University of North Carolina by the name of Luke May. Luke May walked on at the University of North Carolina the last 2 years. He's been all conference. Why? Because he didn't have a lot of natural talent, but he had a lot of grit and work ethic, so he maximized what he had. There was another man that played at the University of North Carolina. His name was Michael Jordan. He had all the natural talent in the world, but he also had all the drive and grit, which means the sky was the limit. There was no lid to how great he could be because he was willing to put the effort in, and he was already naturally gifted. You know why he had that drive and grit? He got cut from his high school basketball team his sophomore year of high school. And he went out and said, I'll never experience that again. Failure drives success. Your talent will protect you from failure to the point it will handicap you sometimes. Sometimes the enemy's greatest weapon against you is to let you succeed, because then you don't believe you can fail. You'll find that often in life with people who have never failed, and then they have a little bit of failure and they don't know how to handle it, and they'll go into a horrible spiral because they didn't learn how to fail early. Sometimes that happens because the enemy allowed it. Sometimes it happens because parents were way too overprotective. and they didn't let their kid lose a basketball game when they were 10, so they didn't learn how to deal with loss. It's why I argue against not keeping score. You got to learn how to win. You got to learn how to lose. It's a talent that everybody's got to learn. You got to learn how to deal with it. You're going to lose in life. Learn. The younger you are when you learn to cope with it, the further you can go without it crippling you. So that is how I pick out leaders. Did that help in any way? You didn't know you was going to get a 45-minute answer, did you? I'm sorry. Good. Intentional fishing. Now I'm going to give you the third type of fishing. Y'all ready? Commercial fishing. Commercial fishing is what the church ought to be doing. Commercial fishermen look at the phases of the moon, the tide, the water temperature. They know the best spots to go. They know when the fish will be running, when they'll be there. They track the patterns. Everything they do is intentional. They know what depth to drop the net, where to catch the most fish, where to pull them up. Intentional fishing is what the church was created to be. When Jesus Christ talks to the disciples about making them fishers of men, these guys weren't out there with a pole and a hook hoping they'd catch one. They were out there with nets pulling in boatloads. And when they got a boatload full, the moment they go out, they've been fishing all night, hadn't caught anything, Jesus says, throw your net to the other side. Them boys been fishing their whole lives. Why is this story, this parable, even in the Bible? It just makes them look like bad fishermen. Because Jesus was trying to tell them, I'm trying to teach you how to catch fish, and you don't know how to catch these fish yet, but when I do, you're going to pull in an abundance like you've never had. And notice when they got the net full, what did they have to do? They had to call some other people to come help them. Build the team so you are prepared for the full nets. If you are not building a team in preparation of the growth that's coming, the growth won't come. When you're out there by yourself and you're just kind of going through the motions, you're like, well, that's what I got. They ain't coming. He who is faithful over a few things shall be ruler over many. Faith is the preparation for the abundance of the harvest before you can ever see the grain in the field. Preparation for the fish. The other beautiful thing about a commercial fisherman is he pulls up everything that's in the net. He don't care what it is. It all comes in the boat. In that story, they get the nets to the bank, and then it says they went through and pitched back those that were not good. Our job is to get them in the boat to the bank, let Jesus determine which ones are worth keeping and which ones aren't. When we will quit judging the fish based on what they look like to us and get them in the boat and let the master take care of sorting it all out. My job is to get as many people in the boat as possible. I don't care what they look like when they walk through my door, what background they come from. I don't care if they walk in 3 sheets to the wind, high as a kite, on heroin. Doesn't matter to me. Because 3 sheets to the wind, you like that? Y'all know what that term means? That's a country term, means drunk. Drunk. 3 sheets to the wind. That's a Axton, Virginia country term. And if you don't know where Axton is, nobody else does either. It's got a population of about 900 people. And my church is 4 miles from the closest gas station. Truth. 4 miles from the closest gas station. But we double the size of our community on Sunday morning. When church is in, the community doubles. Why? Because we got nets. But the only reason we got nets is because somebody else came along and taught me how to fish. Because before I was laying on the bank with a hook in the water, and every Sunday I'd leave depressed because I didn't catch nothing. And I was miserable and ready to quit. And somebody came along and said, hold on, let me give you something. The reason I flew down here today was so I could have a moment to say, hold on, let me give you something. Somebody gave this to me, let me give it to you so that your nets can be strong and you can have a team ready for the harvest that's coming. I believe there's a revival getting ready to break loose. But we've got to start preparing as a church, not just praying. Look, we pray, we're like, I'm praying for the harvest. I'm praying. God didn't say pray for the harvest. He said pray for laborers for the harvest. Well, if you want to labor, you better train them. Because if not, they just go out there and stomp down the crops, which the churches have been doing plenty of. We need them to be able to get the harvest into the barns. We need to train the laborers for the harvest that's there. All right, so we went through the goals we set for our connections director, and we started talking then about how you identify leaders. Let's talk about the goals we set for our worship directors. Worship directors, my worship director was thinking he was doing a phenomenal job because our worship on Sunday morning was good. The music was good. It was crisp. Everybody was engaged. The people that were coming were enjoying it. Everybody said, man, we love it. It's got such a powerful feeling in the room. You can feel the presence of God. And I wasn't happy. And so me and him talked. And he's like, what's wrong? I said, do you feel like you're doing a good job? He said, yeah, man, everything I know of. I said, okay, we've got different expectations. Obviously, we got different expectations because he thought I wanted just to have a great worship experience on Sunday. I did want that. But what I really wanted was for him to grow his team. And so his team was the same size for a whole year. I judge my worship director on how many singers he adds. Every single person that you get volunteering adds 4 people to your congregation. I want as many people as possible engaged that have talent. Now, look, is that a little tough? Yeah, because not everybody can sing. And just because their mama told them they could sing don't mean they can sing. And just because they think they can sing and they want to show everybody they can sing don't mean they can sing. So you got to have a little bit of, there's a little bit of a tryout process. But if somebody has a musician's ear or can hear music, even though they can't sing, a lot of times they're great in the sound booth because they can hear the music. But I want him to grow in singers. I want him to grow in musicians. I want him to have more people in the booth and creative. And creative for me is the people who does our stage designs. We redo our stage every 4 weeks. We change the design up in some way. So I want teams doing all of these. And all of those are the worship director's responsibility. Not only do I want a great encounter, a great experience on Sunday morning with the worship, I want music that's relevant that people can sing. I also want them to be growing in all of these. So we number the number of singers, musicians, people in the booth, and creative we have. And his expectations are to grow that and we don't just look at it yearly. We look at it about every 2 months. Because if you wait till a year to evaluate, you'll never get back on course. If you have more singers on stage, more musicians, more people in the booth, and more creative, your church will grow. The more people you get involved, the bigger your church will get, the more people you'll reach. For my kids area, I'm judging attendance, leaders, and volunteers. I want to know how many kids they have, how many leaders, and how many volunteers. And you ask, how does the kids director increase their attendance, though? How do you judge them on attendance? They just have whatever kids are there. That's not true. Our kids director ran a thing called Lego to Church. And Lego to Church, they built these Lego men, and they built the heads of them out of like propane tanks and did Lego men. And what they did is all the kids were sent home with invites the week before. Next week is Lego to Church. Ask a friend of yours to spend the night with you and then bring them to church next week. We're going to have a huge Lego build-off. And we have a budget, so we didn't buy Legos. We bought the Dollar General knockoff version Legos. We got a budget, baby. And so, accountability. So we went and bought all these little boxes of Legos. Now, we didn't buy one for every kid. We have 260-some kids. We bought enough for one service because we run 3 services. And then we just put them back in Ziploc bags with the picture, and the next team got to open theirs. So here's what we did. We lined all the kids up by age groups, and they raced to see who could build theirs the quickest, but they had to be as accurate as possible. So at the end, all these kids have their little stuff. The first one, as soon as you got done, you'd run up and set it on the table with your name, then the next one. So all the kids lined their stuff up. At the end, they judged them. And they didn't judge them by who got done the fastest, but which one was the most accurate compared to the picture. And then they taught a lesson on God is making us, but he's not interested in how quick he makes us, but how accurately he makes us into the image he created us for before he knit us together in our mother's womb. So they did Lego to Church. Our children's attendance doubled that week. Well, you know what happens when your children's attendance doubles? Your attendance in your sanctuary goes up because parents come with them. And if the kids had a great experience and had fun, even if their parents don't go to church, the next week the kid is like, Mama, I want to go back to that church. And they draw folks in. My kids director has as much to do with growing my church as I do. Most of the time, a whole lot more. Because they're bringing kids into a safe, fun, clean environment. And people that don't go to church don't ask their kids, what did you learn today? They ask, did you have fun? Well, you can have fun and learn something about God. They played with Legos, but they learned the fact that God was making them in a process throughout their life. So kids are judged by attendance. Students are the same ones. Attendance, leaders, volunteers. Now, my student director and my worship director collaborated, and now we have a student worship band. So they work, the worship director works with them, the student director does the recruiting, and we have a huge worship band. Well, what does that do? That ties them in and connects them, but it also draws in unchurched teenagers. If your buddy, your friend, is on stage singing that Wednesday night, you'll come to hear them sing even if you don't care anything about the service or what else is going on. And so the fact that they grow that band actually grows the students. We did not have a student director in position until we broke 600. We didn't have one. Our students were just in with our adults. Our student director took over. We had 600 adults. Their students were running about 25 on Wednesday nights. They implemented a student band and went through some creative ideas. They did stuff like color wars and tribe wars. So we run students and we run kids the same way. Large group, all of them are together, and then they break out into small groups. And this is the key to growing a large, healthy children's ministry, by the way. Small groups is what grows your children's ministry. The large group stuff is fun. The small groups is where they build relationship. Most kids, especially when they get middle school and become teenagers, don't have a single adult who will sit down and have a real conversation with them. They just don't. So when our kids, we start them off with a small group leader, and their small group leaders are consistent. So every Wednesday night when you come to church, if you're in students, when our Wednesday nights is when our students meet, you come to students, there's a large group gathering, the worship team sings, they'll go through a lesson, then they'll break out in small groups based on age and sex. So boys and girls are divided, then they're divided up by age, so they can be very specific with the issues they're dealing with. And they've got this same small group leader each week. My small group leaders are pastors to those churches of teenagers and adolescent kids. We just started when one of those gets baptized, one of the students gets baptized, their small group leader gets to baptize them because they're who they have the connection with. When they have a bad day at school, they don't call their best friend, they call their small group leader. When they're battling with suicidal thoughts and the enemy's beating them up, they call their small group leader. That is how a church works. I told you when we started, the larger your church gets, the fewer people you pastor. We're going underneath the who needs to be on your team. I'll leave that one down there. This is called a segue. At least that's what I'm going to call it. We're going to move from the fact that this is how students works to how your church works. In a traditional church, it looks like this, and you have the congregation, then you have a board, then you have a pastor. And everything is about supporting your pastor. If he's going to do a funeral, you're going to go see him. If he's going to speak at a special event, everybody come see, everybody support the pastor. It's all about supporting the pastor. I want us to flip the triangle. And the pastor is all about helping develop and support the ministry. In a small church, you would have a pastor, you need directors, and then you have the volunteers / congregation. This is the way a small church needs to work. Now, the way they've been working is the pastor works directly with the volunteers, and the pastor's burnt out, tired, exhausted, and holds the church at a small size. If you add those 4 directors in there, now the directors work with the volunteers, so the church gets larger because they can reach more people, because they can sustain 40 relationships each as opposed to you sustaining 40. You pastor your directors and their families. For your church to keep growing, once you get directors in place and you have them developed and you're meeting with them on a regular basis, then you add coordinators. So you would have a children's director, and then you may have a coordinator for nursery and a coordinator for elementary school kids. We have 4 coordinators at this point, and then they work with the volunteers. This is a medium-sized church. A medium-sized church is $300 to $799. A small church is going to be $0 to $299. And when I say small church and you need directors at a small church, understand to change and keep growing, the quicker you make these changes and start adding directors and coordinators, the faster you'll grow. It's what contributes to growth. It's actually what drives it. I'm going to give you a principle as a pastor so it doesn't stun you. It's called the 20% rule. Whenever you make a major change as a pastor or a leader, expect to lose 20% of your congregation. Not everybody's going to like change. That's an amen point, isn't it? And the reason they don't is because as the church grows, it's not they don't love the Lord, they lose influence. And when they lose influence, they feel like they're losing control. So you will watch them get people, good, godly people, fight you over reaching the lost. And you're like, what in the world is wrong with them? It's just because they're afraid, because they feel like they're losing control and they're out of their comfort zone. You will lose 20% of your congregation when you start doing major changes. Here's the beauty of this. It's going to cost you 20%. If you can make these changes when you have 30 people, that's 6 people leave. and you can grow. If you make that change when you're at 100, that's 20 people. The quicker you make the changes in the way your church is structured, the less it will cost you. Now, does that mean those people will no longer love the Lord? No, they'll probably go get planted in another church that's run off a relational model and they feel more structured and more comfortable. Here's what I found. A lot of them will leave mad, and as you keep growing, they'll migrate back in quietly. They leave loud, they come back quietly. I have an open hand policy as a pastor. I love you when you leave. I love you when you come. It doesn't matter where you're going. If you're going to minister somewhere else, you'll go with my blessing. If you're leaving because you're mad at me, you'll go with my blessing. I love you. You're not mine. You're God's. You're God's child, not my child. My only job is to feed the sheep. I can't feed you if you don't show up. Not my responsibility. Too many pastors are married to the church and feed their wives. I was called to be married to my wife and feed the church. The church is Jesus' wife. It's Jesus' bride. And if you get those confused, you'll mess it all up. So make sure that you have an open hand policy and understand 20% of your congregation is likely to walk out the door. I got to teach this. I know I'm running on time, but I got to. All right, there's this thing called a bell curve. So every congregation, no matter when it started, if it's 100 years old or 10 years old or 4 minutes old, when the congregation starts, it starts off with vision. Vision is what drives it. Vision always drives it. Vision is growing. It's in that point, it's really chaotic. Because stuff is growing, stuff is changing, there's no structure in place, it's really exciting. Vision is driving it. You'll go from vision into a place where you start developing programs, you start organizing and putting programs in place. And you'll start putting programs in place to help with all the people, help minister to all the people, and programs start taking place. Then you'll go into a place called maintenance. And in maintenance, you're just trying to maintain the programs you've already put in place. And then the mindset becomes more about keeping what you have instead of reaching the lost. Happens to every church, happens to every organization, every business runs a bell curve. I'll give you two prime examples. Anybody ever heard of Kmart? Heard of Walmart? Walmart and Kmart started about the same time with vision. Both of them grew rapidly. There was a third one that was in there that started even earlier. It was called Sears. They all started off with this vision of reaching all these communities all over America with goods and services and getting them to them quicker and at a lower price. So they all start off with vision. Then they had programs they organized. Sears came up with this thing called Craftsman Tools. You buy one, if it breaks for a lifetime, they'll give you a new one. It was their bread and butter. It's what they made everything on. But they went into a season of maintenance. They were maintaining their customer base. They were just trying to keep them. The problem is their customers got older and died. Happens to churches. And if you keep trying to maintain, you can't because you're running against time. If you're not constantly reaching new people, you are dying. Kmart started doing the same thing. But Sears was older, so it went through the process sooner. Sears went out of business. What does Kmart do? They buy Craftsman. When a church keeps talking about what we used to do instead of what we gonna do, they in the maintenance process and they getting ready to start this quick, sudden thing called death. If they always talk about the good old day, I wish the power of God would move in here like it did in 1978. You were Kmart looking at Sears talking about, well, Craftsman kept you alive for years, we'll buy it. They bought Craftsman. You know what happened to Kmart? They died. You know who's dying next? Lowe's. Why? Because they bought Craftsman. That was yesterday's innovation. Who didn't die? Walmart. Why? Because while they were maintaining, Walmart put a McDonald's and a Subway inside their place. Then they put in a bank. Then they put in eye care. Then they put a gas station out front. Walmart right now, you get an apartment, live in the back. I think they call them dressing rooms, but if you don't ask, don't tell them nothing. Just live in the dressing room. You'll be fine. That's called a J curve. While Kmart and Sears were trying to still live on yesterday's innovation, Walmart was coming up with the next thing. Now look, they still had to dip for a minute. Why? Because everybody gets scared when change happens. Walmart stock drops every time they get ready to do something new for a minute. And then as they start being successful, it goes up. Walmart just threw one of these because Amazon started kicking their butt. Yes, ma'am. Grocery pickup. And you know why they do grocery pickup and they do online ordering? Because Amazon was killing them. And Amazon did it and Walmart said, hold on. If Amazon can do that, we got a better supply chain and supply network. We don't have to run it from warehouses halfway across the country. We can run it from our box store right in the neighborhood. Oh, we got them. They threw a J-hook, but look, it dipped before it went up. That's what will happen with this 20%. It's the dip on your J-hook. And then you go back into vision, and the reason you lose people is because chaos comes with this. Because you're now doing things you've never done before. You're trying to refigure it out, and all they want to do is go back to what it used to be, but what it used to be won't work anymore. Everything's always changing. It's evolving. God is not a God who goes backward. He's a God of progress. He's a God of change. He's a God of creation. You have to be creating new ways to reach people with the same truth of the message of the gospel. Gospel never changes. How you relate it, better. Jesus was the best example I've ever seen of this. He taught biblical principle all day long. How many scripture did Jesus quote? Very few. He almost never quoted. If he did, it was Isaiah. He liked to quote some Isaiah. Where else did he quote from? Deuteronomy, Psalms. He quoted, but it was very selective. He always taught in stories that related to the people. He taught about farming. He taught about money. He taught about fishing. Why? Because they could relate and identify. He was teaching the same truth, but in a way they could relate to it in their society. Jesus was the J-hook, and all the Pharisees and Sadducees hated him. He was teaching the same thing that was in the law. He was bringing the fulfillment of it, but they hated him because they lost control. It's the same reason church folks will fight you today when you start reaching the lost. It's about control. Throw a J-hook. J-hook will cost you a full minute, but your ceiling goes up exponentially. Walmart has thrown about 20 of those, and they keep growing. Amazon's throwing them now. Amazon's now going, oh, now we're going to open some box stores. Now we're going to start doing food. Now we're going to do, why? Because you got to constantly be moving. There's a business book called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's about a little rat, and you move the cheese, and it can't ever find it again. In business, if you keep doing what you did 20 years ago, you're going to run out because business changes, because people change. Same thing in church. People change. What they need, they desire is shifting. People aren't coming to church 4 times a week. They're not coming Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and into a prayer meeting on Mondays. They can't. Life is too busy. How do you change that? Bishop's done it here. You get a TV presence. You get an online presence. You start ministering to them where they are because it's about ministering to the people, not getting them in your building. It's shifting. You can still have a building. Got to change your ideas. On this little chart right here, this is who, in the who section of your paperwork. Who needs to be on your team? If you're a small church under 300, you need to be working on building directors. The directors and the quality of your directors will determine the size of your church. If you're a medium church, 300 to 799, your numbers may be a little different. Yeah. Yours were modified. What's the numbers for a medium church?
300 to 799.
Are they the same? Okay. All right. That you're going to be working on your coordinators. I thought they were different. And then a large church, which is of 800 to 199. Anything over 2,000 is considered a mega church. A large church, you're working on team leaders. So you add one more level. And I'll tell you how that works real fast. So as you get larger, you have multiple services. So I have a director of, say, Connections. And Connections has a coordinator for the parking lot. They have a coordinator for the lobby, a coordinator for the worship center, and a coordinator over follow-up. Well, underneath my parking lot coordinator, he'll have 3 team leaders. First service, second service, third service, team leaders. I never want anybody managing more than 10 people because it gets very inefficient. That's a business principle. A person can only manage 7 to 10 people. So you're always pushing relationship and decision-making down. And as a manager or as a person, like say a director ends up with more than 10 people on their team, it's time to add a coordinator. That's how you know it's time to add the next step is when you get 7 to 10 people. As soon as I hit 7, I start developing a coordinator. And then when it gets to 10, I break it off. And then when the coordinators get 7 to 10 under them, you add a team leader. And the team leaders manage the volunteers or the team members. So a small church pastor, director, volunteers, a medium church pastor, director, coordinator volunteers, and a large church pastor, director, coordinator, team leader volunteers. That is how you keep unity and vision. And the way we keep everybody going in the same direction, we have people that coordinate it down. Problem solving comes back up. And then we have goals and objectives that are measurable so we can make sure everybody's staying on task and keeping the main thing the main thing. I have often found that when I am not getting the results I want from a director or a coordinator, it's because it has not been properly communicated and they have different expectations. If we can set the same expectations, it's like me and my wife. If my wife says, hey, I'm cooking dinner tonight, and I say, okay, I'll be home for dinner, and she's like, all right, what do you want? And I tell her, and she's all excited. She cooks dinner. I get home. She's in the bed. She's mad and ticked off. The dinner's laying there on the table with aluminum foil over it. And I came in at 7 o'clock, and I'm like, baby, what's wrong? I showed up for dinner like I said I was, and you were already in the bed mad. She said dinner was at 6. Different expectations. She had expected me at 6. I showed up at 7. It hurt her feelings that she had made all that preparation in the work, and I wasn't there when the dinner was ready. I thought I was there exactly on time, but our expectations were off, so it led to disappointment. If you do any marriage counseling, and I used to do a ton of it. I don't do it anymore. Now I just go to marriage counseling. Hey, I'm going to be honest with you. If you've been married for long, counseling is a great thing. Go and sit and talk to somebody who won't yell back at you. It's good. It's healthy. It really is. But I used to do a ton of marriage counseling, and I passed all that down too. But in marriage counseling, almost 95% of the time, the reason husbands and wives couldn't get along is because they had different expectations. And it may be expectations they didn't talk about before they got married that they should have. Who wanted to have, how many kids you wanted to have, where you wanted to live, what you're expected for a career, how much education. Because there was different expectations, they lived mutually upset. And I want to tell you, this isn't just working in one or two places. There are 22 churches in the Compassion Network that run this model. We're Compassion Axton. There are other churches that run this exact same model. All of them are growing at an average of about 40% a year. Well, churches that aren't running this model are growing at an average of negative 0.2 a year. The average church in America is actually shrinking. So we're defying the odds and growing by 40%, and it's because we're changing structure. It's not just those churches. We now are coaching a bunch of churches, and out of those churches we're coaching that are actually implementing the model, they're getting about 22% growth. So it actually is changing the momentum of the church world that was shrinking and dying and turning the corner. Now, it takes a minute, especially if you have a very traditional church and you've done things a certain way for 70 years. It's going to take a minute to turn it. You start turning it very slowly. Quick example, 3 ways to do change: a 90-degree change, a 60-degree change, or a 30-degree change. Base that on an airplane. If an airplane turns on a 90-degree, it'll crash. It cannot sustain a 90-degree turn. If it turns on a 60 degrees, all the oxygen mask will come down, and the overhead luggage will fall out, and everybody will be puking. But if you take a 30-degree change, nobody even notices. Planes do it all the time to come into runways. 30-degree turn, nobody even notices. There was a young pastor, this is a true story, young pastor in North Carolina who had taken over a very traditional church, and he was making a lot of changes. He had taken down the choir banister. They had changed the way they were doing the style of music. Everything was going good. One Sunday, he decides to move the piano from the left-hand side of the stage to the middle of the stage, and he gets fired on the spot because he refused to put it back. He comes to a funeral there 3 years later, and the piano's set in dead center of the stage. And he looks at the new pastor. He said, dude, what did you do to get that to happen? He said, they fired me on the spot over that. He said, I moved it 1 inch every week. Sometimes change has to be so gradual, nobody notices it. Choose the hill you die on as a leader. Some things are worth it, some aren't. A little bit at a time. As a leader of a congregation, if you're going to kill all of them to get them to change, you hadn't helped them. But if there are some things, ethically, this has got to change. If there's backbiting and gossiping going on, you put your foot down, that's going to change, or I'm leaving. That we ain't having it. Other things like the color of the carpet or how we're going to have the lights dim during worship or what kind of music we want, do that gradual. Compromise. Walk them through it. The next thing you know, you've got very contemporary worship. Nobody even knew the difference. They're like, man, I love this. This is my favorite song. The same person that would have hung you a year before if you'd have done it. It's all about how gradually you make the shift. Leadership is about developing people, not developing process. But you got to have process to develop people. Now I want to talk about, as you develop a team, how you have to change the way you lead. Bishop, if you don't mind, keep me appraised on time, because I'll talk all night. If you can't tell, it's my thing. All right, there are two very distinct kinds of leaders: a dictator leader and a facilitator leader. If you have been a dictator leader, and don't think that means that you've been mean or dogmatic. It just means that everybody comes to you for the answers, and you tell everybody the answers. If you've been in a position where you've told everybody what to do and they expect you to, that's a dictator leader. It doesn't mean you were mean about it. It just means that all the answers came through you. If you change overnight to a facilitator leader, you'll freak people out. They'll get scared and they'll leave. They'll run, because they're used to that structure and that control, and they think all of a sudden you're not telling them exactly what to do. You don't know. So you got to ease into it. But let's talk about the difference. So a dictator leader gives answers. A facilitator leader asks questions. If you can learn to lead somebody by asking questions so they come to the right conclusion on their own, you didn't tell them what to think, you taught them how to think. And if you can teach them how to think, they can come to the right conclusion when you're not there. It's how you empower someone. It's kind of like if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. Same thing. Instead of giving answers, ask questions. The dictator leader always comes up with solutions. If everybody's got a problem, they ask you, you give them a solution. A facilitator leader, the team comes up with solutions. Me trying to fix the parking lot and tell people how to do it, as opposed to the team coming up with the solution. This was dysfunctional. That worked out beautifully. A dictator keeps or receives credit for everything. If the church grows and everybody's like, pastor's doing a great job, church grows, and you take all that credit, when it quits growing, you're going to take all the blame. A facilitator leader gives credit. My church doesn't grow because of me. My church grows because of my team. And that's the truth, because when it was just me doing it, it was 35. And I don't pastor 35 people anymore. I pastor 15. My church ministers to 900 people on Sunday, but I pastor 15. I pastor my directors, their spouses, and their kids. That's who I pastor. They pastor their coordinators, their spouses, and their kids. And the coordinators pastor their team leaders and their spouses and their kids, and the team leaders pastor the volunteers. It's a bunch of little churches inside of a big church. I don't know my volunteers' names. And I'm not saying that proudly. I just don't. I can't keep up with all of them. I mean, it's 250 some volunteers. I don't know all their names. No, it's 450 volunteers. I don't know all their names. There's no way I can. There's people standing outside my office on Sunday morning when I'm walking through the sanctuary wearing a lanyard, got on a compassion shirt. I ain't never seen them before. I hug them and love on them anyway. Man, thank you so much for what you're doing, man. This isn't possible without you, because it's not. You know who's growing the church? Seth's not. Those volunteers are, because now it's their church and they're serving and their families are now coming and they're reaching their brother-in-law that was lost, and that's who grows the church, not me. I pastor my four directors and their families. That's all I keep up with. That's why all during the week I can come do this. Because now I'm investing in your guys' system, because that system's working without me there. Just like McDonald's is producing cheeseburgers and Ray Kroc is not anywhere to be seen. That's the guy who made McDonald's huge. He didn't found it, by the way. The McDonald's brothers founded McDonald's, and they could never get it out of Southern California. They had the systems, but they didn't have the leadership capacity. All they could think of was how to build a new restaurant. And he's like, no, don't build a restaurant. Let's buy land and sell people franchises. He had the business mind. His leadership capacity took McDonald's to a global powerhouse. It was their system he invested in. Genius. Always give the credit away. Always correct in private, praise in public. Correct in private, praise in public. I've got a rule for my team. Don't ever discuss an issue with somebody who can't do something about it. If you're talking to somebody about something and they can't fix it and you can't fix it, the conversation's irrelevant. Don't have it. That's gossip. So I want all of my team complaining up. So if a volunteer has a problem, I want them telling the team leader, and the team leader telling the coordinator, and the coordinator telling the director, and the director coming to me. I always want problems coming up. I don't want them going sideways, because that's when you get a mutiny. A dictator leader always feels like they have to fix it. It's the hero mentality. A facilitator leader gives input and lets others fix it. Ever been in church as a pastor and somebody come tap you on the shoulder and say, Pastor, the commode stopped up in the men's restroom. It's overflowing. What are you going to do? And I was like, I didn't realize you had to be ordained to go work on that. That must be a holy toilet. Like, you got to have ordination before you can even touch that toilet. Well, I said, well, what do you think needs to be done? Well, the water probably needs to be cut off, and then we need to get in there and get a mop bucket and clean it up. I said, that sounds good. You going to take care of that? Yeah, I got it. All right, thank you. Well, why do they need to come talk to me? They needed affirmation. It wasn't that they wanted me to fix it. They needed permission to go fix it. The reason they needed permission is because I didn't have structure in place to automatically give them that permission. I had a guy genuinely middle of worship. I got both hands in the air, head back, tears running down my face. Me and God's having a moment, taps me on the shoulder and says, Pastor, it's a little hot in here. Okay. Well, James is back there, and James is a big tither. James is back there. He's sweating. Tell James Jesus died on the cross. He can sweat for a minute. He'll be all right. And then I said, whoa, don't tell James that. Don't tell James that. I said, look, man, please don't ever do this again. I said, James will be okay. Either you go fix it or let it be. But in that, it was because that individual didn't feel like they had permission to go fix it without me. Once you start giving that away, a lot of those problems come off your plate that you've been dealing with because you give them permission. Make a call. Now, the other week, I came in our room, in our building, and walked down the hall, and I looked down the kids' hall, and the whole kids' hall has been remodeled. It's been repainted. The decorations been changed. I didn't even know anything about it. I've been out of town for 5 days. I've been out training. And I walk in, so I go find Adam, my executive pastor. I'm like, dude, who redid the kids' hall? He said, what do you mean? I said, go look at it. He walks in, and he's like, man, that looks great. Who did it? I don't know. He gets in touch with Penny, the children's director. And Penny's like, oh, yeah, we had some extra money in the budget, so we went ahead and picked out the colors. Me and my volunteers, we got in, we did this, and so did that, and so on. And I didn't even know the name of the people she was telling me did stuff. I said, that's awesome. It looks great. That's the coolest moment when people just handle stuff and you don't even know what's happening. Or pull up at church on a Tuesday night and be like, where are all these people come from? Walk in and be like, what's happening? Oh, we had a big giveaway. We're feeding so-and-so, and all these people are cooking so we can go feed these communities. I'm like, who organized that? That's awesome. Good job. Didn't nobody ask me. Nobody expected me to be there. I didn't know anything about it. I have been able through the system to empower them to work in their giftings and do ministry, and I don't even need to know about it. Watching people grow into that place is empowering for them, and it takes a load off your shoulders. Like, I could disappear. I don't even think they would notice I was gone. They'd be like, who's that new guy talking? I don't even know him. And move right along. Does that hurt your ego? A little bit. They had staff meeting the other night. I was out of town. I said, look, if y'all need me, call me. I'm traveling, just call me. My phone ain't ring. After it was over, I called Adam. I said, man, y'all ain't called me. He said, we ain't need you. Let me pick my little ego up out the floorboard, dust it off, put it back in my pocket. But when you get to the place where that's actually a win, it still stings for a minute. I ain't gonna lie. I was still for a minute. I got in my feels for a moment. I had to gather myself. But the fact that they can make decisions and run ministry without you means they've been empowered and it's handled. It's actually the sign of growth. So these are the different things. A dictator leader always blames people, blames others. A facilitator leader takes responsibility. They make decisions without me. I wasn't in staff meeting. They didn't call me. But if those decisions go wrong, it's ultimately me. But I put my stamp of approval on their leadership. You're like, man, that takes a lot of trust. It does. But trust doesn't come easy. I want to give you, what time we got? We still good? Oh, this is the best stuff of the day right here. It genuinely is. I want you to go to the bottom of that page where it says Circle of Team Building. This is where most churches or most organizations altogether collectively miss it. Circle of team building. The first thing you do in building a team is somebody accepts a position. You join the team. You join a team. You bring a director in. The director brings in a coordinator. Whatever it is, you get somebody to join your team. So you go through the whole fishing process. You appointed them as director of connections. They have now joined your team. And look, if you're right now a pastor and you don't have any team, like you don't have any director's positions, you don't have a worship director, anybody there, do this. Set up 4 chairs and then your chair. And you meet with them once a week with 4 empty chairs. And you write stuff out on the whiteboard, you plan, you put organization together just like those chairs are full, and you pray over those chairs for the person God's going to send to fill those chairs. And when God fills one of them, y'all pray over the other 2. But meet every single week with those chairs because you're building a habit in you. And discuss it openly. Yep, people will think you're crazy. It won't be the first time, I promise you. People thought you was crazy before. But if you'll do that, that's preparation. It's just like us preparing for the harvest. If you'll prepare for that moment of staff meeting, you plan it on your schedule. Every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I'm going to meet with these 4 chairs, and we're going to talk about what we're going to do this week and next month. It will make you intentional about fishing for them. It also makes it prepared when they come in. You've already got a schedule set. But somebody joins your team, and the best way I can relate this is to marriage. And I use this example a lot. I may have used it here last time. But when me and Donna got married, me and my wife got married, she was 18 years old, I was 21. So at 18 and 21, we get married. And we got married the day after she graduated high school because she was expecting our first child. Yep, I ain't always been this saint y'all see before you. Don't judge it how it starts, judge it how it finishes. So she gets pregnant with my first child. We get married the day after she graduates high school. Needless to say, it was not the best situation. Her mom and daddy weren't exactly happy with me. I don't blame them. We get married. She's crying and everything. She can't believe she was so blessed to marry a man like me. I'm sorry. I'm too humble some days. My bad. We get married. And all right, you're supposed to be honeymooning. You married. All right, that's good. Well, all of a sudden, that joining that team ain't so good when nobody washed all the clothes because they just piled up. And she came from mom and daddy's house where mama washed the clothes. And I would just throw clothes away and go buy new ones because I ain't washing them. And so we had issues. We had conflict. We had to figure out who was going to wash the clothes. Well, and then you think, well, okay, you worked that out. It's not a big deal. But then major stuff pops up, like huge stuff. Like you run out of toilet paper and somebody got to figure out who's going to hang the next roll. And does it come off the top or the bottom? Don't you jack that up. Your spouse will lose their junk if you mess that up. And heaven forbid you so lazy you don't even put it on the roll. You just set it on top sideways. Stuff will hit the fan. That drove her crazy. What drove me crazy is you'd have a brand new tube of toothpaste, she'd grab it in the middle and squeeze. That don't even make sense. Work at the back end and work your way up. Why are you going to just squeeze it in and it's all squished up? And then you forget to buy new, and so you in there with the back of your toothpaste pushing on the back of the tube. Some of y'all been there. And then you still ain't get there, so you roll it up. Then you ain't got it. Ain't nobody still bought toothpaste, so you cut the end off with some scissors and stick your toothbrush inside to get. Some of y'all can identify. You got to work through that. And so you fuss and you argue. She was already pregnant, so 4 months after we got married, we got a baby. So now we got a baby that's growing. I'm 21 years old. I'm doing heat and air conditioning. I'm making like $10 an hour trying to provide for both of us. And we got a kid that's screaming, and Donna's trying to go back to school. And all the stress and the pressure, we had conflict. A lot of it. Every single day, I was ready to go back to work just to avoid the conflict. I'd be like, I'll work overtime. All you want me to. Let me know. We've been married 20 years in June, so we survived so far. Conflict. But conflict is what most churches avoid at all costs. We think conflict is unholy. Jesus didn't mind conflict. If you want to change something, you got to have conflict. You cannot change what you were unwilling to confront. You can't change it. My wife wanted to change the fact that I was not willing to hang that toilet paper on the roll. We had conflict. She confronted the issue. Guess what? I guarantee you I hang a new roll now. I'll be at somebody else's house. I'll be just using the bathroom. I'm going to hang a new one. I'll be in the airport. Be like, hey, I got to put some on here. I ain't leaving it empty. Got to fix it. She trained me right. But the conflict is what is growth. Most churches don't grow because they avoid conflict at all cost. Conflict is healthy. Conflict is the only way you get growth. When my kids were growing up, there was conflict. My daughter did not want to clean her room. 12 years old, she'd get mouthy. I didn't even realize you could roll your eyes that far one side of your head. Attitudinal. Why I got to clean my room? You don't come in, it's my room anyway. Oh, no, it ain't your room. I pay the rent. That's my roof. That's my room. And I'm telling you, for you to stay in it, it better be clean. And then the next day, we had the exact same conversation because she was hard-headed like her mama. And, oh, man, I forgot this is going out on TV. I mean, she's hard-headed like her daddy. I'm sorry, baby. My bad. But we went through it. But my daughter is now living on her own in Nashville. She doesn't have daddy there to tell her to clean her apartment. But if I hadn't taught her when she was 12 that we ain't going to live in filth, she would still be living and expecting some Mary maids to show up and clean her room. We have baby Christians because we don't walk through conflict and let them know it's not my job to hand feed you everything you need. Ever have somebody in your church be like, well, Pastor, I just don't feel like I'm getting fed like I used to. Well, feed yourself. You a grown hind-end person. Come on now. You can't open your Bible and read? Well, I don't understand it. That's because you ain't never read it. Read it again and again. Yeah. And if you don't understand it in the language you got, get a different version. When I get a desk that my wife buys from Walmart and I got to put it together, I open the instruction manual and the first page is in Chinese. I can't read Chinese. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I go find a different version of them instructions that I understand. If you don't understand King James, get a new King James. You don't understand that, get an NIV, get an NLT, get an American Translation. Get something, and as you develop and grow, dig in something deeper. It's okay. Start somewhere. But quit looking at somebody else to provide for your spiritual well-being. When you stand before the King, it's only you giving an account of your life. And if you only account you got is, well, Pastor Seth said, you in trouble. And I don't want that responsibility. So conflict is what produces growth in people, but it also produces growth in the organization, in the church. But for us to grow through conflict, it doesn't just grow on one side, it grows on both sides. When Coleman, my 17-year-old son, senior in high school, when he started playing soccer, he would play soccer no matter how good he did. He would come off the field, and I would say the one or two things he needed to get better at. I didn't mean to. I'd be like, man, you did good, but if you do this a little better, if you do that a little better. It's my first time coaching. It's my first time raising a son. Kelsey was my oldest daughter. She was 19. I'm learning. I stole Coleman's love for the game. Where he got to where when he played soccer, he was so busy thinking about what he was supposed to do, he didn't just react. He's a natural athlete, much better than I would ever have been. But because I took that from him, he doesn't perform to his capacity because I stole his confidence. Why? It was my first time being a daddy too. I made mistakes. The conflict, me and him finally had it out one day. He's on the field and I yell something at him. He yells over there, shut up. And he realized what he did when he did it. And he's like, I was talking to Kelsey, Daddy. I promise I was talking to Kelsey. Now, he's 14 years old running down the field yelling, Daddy, I promise I was talking to Kelsey. I knew better, but I also understood in the moment, me and him got to have a conversation. So we had a conversation. And I said, you don't tell your daddy to shut up. You understand? He said, Daddy, I understand. You're completely right. He said, in the moment, I was doing all I could do. And you kept yelling. And I can't stand disappointing you. And I knew I couldn't fix it. And I just reacted. I grew more from that conflict than he did. Conflict produces growth on both sides of the equation. The leader has to be willing to admit when they were wrong and when they handled something wrong and take ownership and grow. Conflict is ownership. If a leader will not accept their responsibility and part in conflict, nobody else will hang around long enough for you to grow. They'll quit on you. But if you're willing to own it when you're wrong and apologize to them and grow together, they'll walk with you through anything. Conflict has to happen for growth. Hey, same thing in church, same thing in marriage, same thing in your home, same thing with your kids. It works in every scenario. After you have conflict, you can get organized. So the third thing on your conflict circle is organized. Too many churches want to join a team and put people in a position and get organized without ever going through conflict. And so they appease everybody, which produces nothing. If you spend all your time appeasing, you'll get nothing accomplished. You must go through conflict. Then you can produce results. Join a team and get organized, you'll produce nothing. Without conflict, you don't get results. Conflict produces results. Kmart died because they were not willing to have conflict and fuss through and argue through the way they had always done stuff. So they're out of business. They no longer exist. Think of all the employees that lost their jobs, all the communities that no longer have as many options for resources because somebody wasn't willing to have conflict. Lack of conflict will kill an organization. Now, if you look for conflict for the fight, you're in trouble. So when you're going to have conflict, before you have it, ask yourself a couple of questions. What is my preferred outcome? What am I actually trying to achieve? And never fight to prove a point. You can prove a point or you can make a difference. You can't do both. If you're fighting to prove a point, if you will apply this in your marriage, it will change your marriage. Do not fight to prove a point. You can have arguments, you can have conflict. Do that to make a difference. Don't ever fight to prove a point. While I'm giving marriage advice, I got one more for you. This is just for marriages. 3-day rule. We can argue over anything in our marriage, but if it's over 3 days old, it's off the table. It keeps us from bringing back old arguments into the next one. So we'll have real conversation. We will not go to bed mad, but we will not bring up anything over 3 days old. It has changed, and I'm not telling you that because I figured that out early. I didn't. That was somewhere around year 19 and 4 months. And I'm at 19 and 6 months. So 19 years and 6 months. Just figured this one out, but it works like a champ. That may not be exactly correct. I may have exaggerated that slightly. So that's the circle of conflict. This is how you build a team. If you ever want to have a ministry team, you have to accept the fact you're going to have to walk through conflict. If not, you'll have a group of people that is not a team, and you'll have absolutely no results. Three days in my marriage. Now, that's not true at church. Because church, sometimes there would be something that happens one Sunday, and I got to get over it during the week and deal with it on the next weekend. Because I try not to deal with anything while I'm mad. I try to get my emotions under control. Now, I will make sure I don't wait too long, because sometimes if I wait too long, I'll talk myself out of it. So I wait just until my anger subsides. Me and God talk about it for a minute, and then I go confront it head on. In my marriage, even if I'm upset and emotional, I deal with it in 3 days. I'm just going to be real with y'all because I believe in that. My wife had an affair 7 years ago. And she had an affair 7 years ago with a guy she worked with. And the reason she had an affair was her own insecurities as part of it. She made that decision. But I helped push her in that way because I was married to my job. And I was working 72 hours a week. I told you it almost cost me my family. Well, the reason was I was never home. And she had the need for affirmation. And he filled that need. Look, if you don't do your homework, somebody else will. There's always somebody willing to step in and do it. That goes for men and women, just so you know. And do what? No, I got the duty part down. The problem was the emotional side didn't work out real well. I was leaving somebody. That was a little more real than I wanted to get on TV, but thank you. I don't even know what my point was now. Oh, okay. So I got it. I'm back. So that happened 7 years ago. Well, the truth was I thought I got over it a long time ago, but that stuff will pop back up. Well, you have to deal with it. Well, you can deal with it and have a conversation, but it's not an argument. An argument is when you're emotionally charged. And it's when you're yelling, you're fussing. And that's okay. You're going to do that as spouses. Sometimes you need to. You need to unload it. Now, you can be emotionally charged and still sin not. And when I say sin not, don't tear somebody down. If your objective in what you're saying is to beat somebody down or make them feel the hurt you've hurt, that's not Christian. Now, I'm not saying it don't come out of us sometimes because we all got some sin in us, but just saying that's not Christian fighting. I mean, Jesus got mad enough, he sat over in the corner and braided a whip. That didn't happen quick. I mean, he was steaming. And when he got up, he came out with a vision. I mean, he was, that's what I tell my wife when I get my whip out. I'm like, I done told you. I'm just kidding. That's not even funny. I shouldn't even made that joke. I feel horrible about that. If y'all knew my wife, y'all know I'd be the one running from her. She's the aggressor. But Jesus, look, Jesus' job, his intent was not to hurt them. If he had wanted to, he would have. He didn't hit them. What did he do? It said he ran them out. He got them out because he needed to fix the situation, but he wasn't trying to make them feel the pain that he felt for the moment. When you try to make other people feel your pain and hurt them the way you hurt, that's a completely different deal than it is when you're just expressing. So it's a healthy way to have conflict. And you're walking through that with your spouse. My 3-day rule is to keep us from always going back and digging up other stuff. So I just threw that in passing. I probably should have left it alone and stayed out of marriage counseling tonight. Definitely should have left off the joke. So it's not good. Me and God's going to talk about that one tonight. I'll go ahead and apologize to y'all. All right. So let's move back into this stuff. So once you build a team and you have a team going, you're going to meet with your directors. Meet with your directors once a week. There's a page in there. It's next to the last section where it talks about how often should you meet. You meet with your directors once a week. Always meet with your directors once a week. Don't meet with them separately. If you meet with them separately, you lose the team dynamic. You want everybody in the room so you can have cross-talk and cross-ideas. You can build unity. The coordinators meet every other week or monthly, depending on your size. We meet every other week because of the size. We first started out meeting monthly. And then you want to meet with your team leaders every 2 months, bi-monthly. Every 2 months. Now, when you meet, what does that look like? Because I have been in a whole lot of meetings that we got absolutely nothing accomplished. So we meet with a purpose. Everything we do is strategic and for a reason. And all of my meetings follow this exact same model. No matter who's conducting them at what level, if you come to a meeting at my church, it'll go like this. Vision / future. When I say vision, people want to get real holy. Like they want to give me the vision for their church, and they want to talk about to reach the lost and desperate and hurt and broken. They'll give me like a 4-page vision. When I say vision and future, I'm talking about 3 months out. A small church plans from week to week, sometimes moment to moment. You ever been in a church and they're like, who's got a special song today? And somebody in the back stands up and they drop off their CD at the sound booth and then they come up and sing. Small churches can get away with that, but if you do that, you'll stay small. When you get larger, you have to plan out further and further ahead. So as you start growing, you'll plan out 2 months, then 3 months. I planned out a year for the church. I'm planned out 2 years in my personal life. It's planned out. It doesn't mean there won't be some changes, but major events, things that are coming are planned out. They're scheduled. Because there's a lot of other people on my team that need to know that schedule. So I need to make sure we're always 3 months out. My sermon series are laid out for a whole year. My sermons are laid out 3 months in advance. The reason that works and the reason that's so effective is because if I lay out a sermon that far in advance, I can give it to my worship director, and they can put together music that coincides with the message, and so we're pushing the same point on the same Sunday. Then my connections director knows what the message is, and they'll make sure everything in the parking lot is pushing the same point. So if I'm going to preach on heaven, I have all my parkers in little funny-looking wings and halos. Hey, you think that's funny now? You ought to see my head of my parking lot is about 6'6", about 300 pounds, and he got on a little halo and some wings. And so all my parkers look that way. And I know what you're saying. Well, you've taken God out of it. The Holy Spirit ain't in it. That's not true at all. God said Jesus Christ was the lamb that was slain from the foundation of the earth. God has a plan. My God is a God of order and structure. God can move as much in the planning as he does in the moment. Does that mean if God shows up and rocks the place, we won't let him go? No, it's his church, not mine. But that doesn't mean I don't put a plan in place, because I remember being at church at 35 and I sat exactly where Bishop's sitting right now and praying to God he would move during the worship service because I didn't have nothing worth preaching. That is not a place I want to be, because I'm going to be held accountable for those lives I'm pouring into. But I've been there. Lord, please move today. I ain't got nothing worth saying. So I want to make sure I'm planned and prepared. 3 months out on all the messages, and all that information is facilitated to the connections director, to the kids director, and the worship director. The reason being is they can make sure that stuff running in students is along the same lines. If they're teaching the kids the same message I'm preaching in the sanctuary, the parents can communicate with the kids during the week, and I will make sure they have more depth in the sanctuary than they do in the kids area, so the parents become the spiritual heroes to their kids, because they can share insight into the story they learned in the kids area. It's a unity of vision. We're all going in the same direction, and my sermon series are not just what hits me. At the beginning of the year, I sat down with all my staff, other pastors I can get in the room. I'll even pull in retired pastors, and we'll talk about what does our body of believers need to learn so they can grow and develop. What's something they need to learn in this next year, and we'll strategically lay that out through the year in our sermon series. My job is to grow and empower the people for the doing of the ministry. I have to be strategic. So 3 months out is the future and the vision. So I always go with that. Then I go leadership principle. I always teach a leadership principle. So the principles I've been teaching today, the Pareto principle, the circle of team building, I'll teach all of those principles. If you need a book to get started with, John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is a phenomenal place to start. It's 21 laws in there. You can teach through them. And what I teach my leaders, my directors, they turn around and teach their coordinators, and the coordinators teach their team leaders. It's how I teach leadership all the way through my structure, and new leaders rise up. Currently, we've got a group of about 15 teenagers, 18 and younger, who think there is a call. They believe God has a call on their life to go into full-time ministry. And so we gather them every Sunday night, and we pour leadership into them. They meet with either coordinators or directors levels, and I come into that meeting, and we teach leadership. Why in the world would I go all over the country teaching leadership and ignore the leaders that God's raising up right within our own congregation? Intentional leadership. I teach leadership to our directors weekly at our staff meeting. There's always a principle, and we'll discuss it and we'll talk about it. Not only do they teach that going down, what will happen is through this structure, you teach leadership to everybody in your congregation, so you all rise together. People end up getting promotions at work. People end up getting better jobs because they know leadership. I'm not about what is the church going to gain. I'm about what are the people going to gain. It's all about what are the people. Help them be everything they're called to be, and no matter what area they're in, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might as glory unto the Lord. The church should be empowering you to succeed. So we teach leadership. So it's vision, and then leadership, and then we do best practices. Make sure I line up with the blanks. Best practices. Best practices means I'll look at one of my leaders that's really doing a good job. Maybe my connections director's added 15 volunteers, and I get them to come up and tell everybody how they're doing it. One is I'm honoring them. I'm rewarding them. I'm pointing out in front of everybody else they've been successful. The other thing is I genuinely want them to be able to tell everybody else how they're doing it. As we're doing best practices, we'll do something called wins and losses. We'll go through every week's Sunday, every Sunday, because we have multiple services, and we'll write down our wins and our losses for each one. Maybe connections was 2 people short in the lobby during second service. That's a loss. Maybe we had 30 guests. That's a win. Maybe we had 5 people saved. That's a win. Whatever it was, we'll do wins and losses. Hey, the sound system acted up during second service during the 4th song. That's a loss. What are we going to do to fix it? What we do is we go through our wins and losses. We do best practices, then we do our wins and losses, which is a part of our best practices. So we know what we're really good at, and we can celebrate. Then what we lost at comes into our next section, which is problem solving. And this is general problem solving. Like this isn't, I've got a teacher in the kids' classroom who doesn't like a parent of this kid, and they had an altercation. That's a personal issue. This is general problem solving with the order of service, how the flow of service is going, how the sound system acted up, whatever issues we got, parking lot issues. And we collectively as a group talk problem solving. We don't always solve them right here. Often we'll get the director of that area to take that problem down to their team and get their ideas and bring them back. 2 things. One is they normally end up with a better solution. The other thing is whatever the solution is, they're bought in because they had input in it. As a leader, the more input you can get into the solution, the more buy-in you have, and the less you have to drag people. You ever feel like you're dragging a locomotive as a pastor and you're like trying to take people where they don't want to go? An old stubborn mule trying to lead them to water? The more you can get them to be a part of the solutions, the easier it is because they'll walk with you. They've got buy-in before you even get there. So we go problem solving. And then the last thing of every meeting is relational. We'll talk about our struggles. We'll talk about what areas we're battling in. Maybe somebody's having a difficulty in their marriage. They're having a kid that's acting a fool. If you got teenagers, your kid's going to act a fool. We'll pray for each other as directors. We'll lay hands on each other. This is the moment we'll anoint each other. We'll do whatever we got to do. We will go to dinner together. This is when we build personal relationship. I'm telling you, I pastor 15 people, and my 15 are my directors, and they're in this room, and this is the time I pour into them the most. Now, they're going to take what I pour into them, and they're going to put their own take on it, and they're going to pour into their coordinators. Ministry on Sunday morning is fishing. This is development. And when you hear leadership, think disciples. Discipleship and leadership is the same thing. Identical. Watch Jesus teach his disciples. He's teaching them leadership. It's all he's doing is how do you convey a message to people and get them to buy into the vision so they'll go with you. That's what ministry is leadership. It's influence. It's all what Jesus is teaching the disciples the whole time. He's teaching them the truth so they can have influence and bring people with them. So I always end relational. It's strategic too. Vision is exciting. Relationship is heartwarming. Everybody leaves feeling good about each other. And if we argued in here because we have conflict, and my rule is in my staff meeting, you can have conflict over anything you want to. Inside this room, we can argue, fuss, and fight, whatever we got to do. When we walk out one voice. And if you don't feel like you're at a place you agree and we're going to be one voice, we ain't done fighting. Let's stay in the room. We'll keep going. And if we can't come with a solution, we'll say, hey, we'll table it to next week. We'll go again. But it stays in this room. When we come out of here, one voice. How in the world can you have a unified body if you don't have unified leadership? I believe the thing we're all waiting on is the moment when our whole body of believers is of one mind and one accord. And when that happens, the power of God falls. The number is 120. It's how many was in the upper room. It's also the number for critical mass for an atomic bomb. Until you get to 120 atoms splitting at the same time, an atomic bomb's like a firecracker. But at 120, it's exploding. They start popping so quickly that it sets off an explosion that levels a 5-mile city block, 5 miles of city. The reason it does it is because you get to a place called critical mass. If your church will get 120 praying adults on the same one mind, one accord, your church will explode. That's the number. 120 adults, one mind, one accord. That's it. Once that happens, watch the explosion. We went from 120 to 800 in a year and a half. When we got to 120 praying adults believing in bond. Now, when I say that, our number was actually a little higher than 120. We were probably running about 200. But only 120 of them were actually of one mind and one accord. And we exploded. It's the number of critical mass. God is a God of order and structure. He made that true in the atomic bomb. He made that true in the upper room. He'll make it true today.
All right, this is our Wednesday night, our Thursday night service, our midweek service, and we have people here that brought tithes too. So if you have a tithe offering, you can bring that up to the offering basket right there, and I'm going to pray us out of here. Father, we thank you so much, Lord. Thank you for Seth Robinson, Lord, in his time, Lord, as he's flown here today and traveling back to New Orleans to stay tonight, early flight tomorrow. Lord, the sacrifice this man makes to invest in us, we just want to say thank you, Lord, for Seth Robinson, Lord, and his investment in our leadership here in the Mid-South Conference, Lord, at Miracle Place Church. We are so grateful, Father. We pray for your grace and your favor to be upon this great man of God, right, church? We pray for your grace, Lord, your mercy to be upon this great man. Lord, that you will cover him, send your angels to encamp around him and guard him. Watch out for him and his family, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for a great marriage, Lord. Thank you, Lord, that he puts the toilet paper on the rack right where it comes over the top, not the bottom. And so, Lord, we're grateful and thankful, Father God. Thank you for our great leaders. Encourage them and strengthen them. Meet every need of every church that's represented here tonight, Lord. And for it all, God, we give you all the glory and all the honor and all the praise. Come on, church. Give him glory in the name of Jesus. Have a great, great night. We love you. Thanks for coming.